to episode 13 of Summoning Insight. This is now an officially Riot sanctioned broadcast. I've just come, you might wonder by my attire, I was actually just at the rehabilitation facility, anti-toxicity facility that Riot have set up. I was very well behaved. I graduated with top marks. Incarnation got kept back again for another year. I hope he gets through this time. Nuke Doc didn't even attend the classes for some reason. I think a letter has been sent home to his parents with a fine. So yeah, welcome to a new era of the show. All things are possible through our Lord Jesus, and I'd like everyone to know that as we start the show now. We will never again criticize anything, because that would be unsportsmanship, and I feel like in a brave new world that Riot's trying to establish, called esports, apparently. I didn't know much about it, but we had this really good teacher in the class. He kind of looked like Seth MacFarlane, and he told me some great wisdom. He said, listen boy, when you've been in esports for 3 months like I have, then you'll know what this business is all about. And I fucked that shit, obviously. So many insight. I'm back. Monty's back. We're going to figure out a way to do this show so it's still the same show. You have to realize 99% of the show we ever did, Monty, was like talk about players, analyze the games, criticize players, say who was really good, right?
Of course it was. That's how it was, man.
So what I've realized is...
But it was actually, we were told, 50%, up to 50% bashing.
Oh, well, no, there was another fellow who apparently owns an American team who said it's 100% negative. There's nothing positive in the show whatsoever.
Wow.
Which is sort of like an indictment of the very act of discussion, thought, free speech in some senses.
It's amazing what certain people who are in power who don't like criticism of their brands think about people who criticize their brands,
I know.
whether it's justified or not.
The weird thing is as well, I saw a guy who looked just like him saying all these wonderful compliments about the Korean mid laner Dade shortly before the Season 3 World Championship. He repeatedly complimented the fellow, said he looked forward to playing him on an even field of battle, and that he actually thought highly of his skills. I mean, I could never believe someone like that in an unprofessional manner would ever have dissed someone, you know. I believe diss is the term they're using on the streets now, you know. In the rehabilitation facility, they told me it was called rampant toxicity that actually is ruining the world. In fact, they even had a lecture called Thorin is the reason why esports will never become mainstream. It's a topic I've heard often spoken about, but I'd never really looked in depth on it. It turns out they're right. They even mathematically proved it, you know. Like, so it was like QED, they are correct. So anyway, the point I'm making here is it's absolutely still possible for us to still do this show. 99% of the show will be the same. And from my perspective, okay, the 1% of people who actually do only tune in for drama or whatever, which is like a side product of this, okay, if they don't tune in, I don't really care. The other people who tune in to actually watch the show, great. There's more than enough of you. And also, listen, I actually think it's like a free speech issue. Like, I think it's bullshit to say that you shouldn't be able to swear like that. But in general, we're smart guys. We can get around that. We can not, without giving undue ammunition to the idiots of the world, we can actually discuss League of Legends, I think. I don't think that's too difficult a challenge for us, right, Monty?
I don't know. It is my job as a person who's paid to talk about League of Legends professionally. I may have some trouble with it, but somehow we'll muddle through what we thought.
We'll try our best. Right, okay, so the first topic for today, we're going to start in NA, my favorite region. And let's start with America's favorite team, the Dallas Cowboys of LCS NA. We're, of course, talking about TSM, our favorite team. Now, people are going to immediately think, if they sort of... No, I wouldn't go there. So we'll just start out like this. People are going to think...
People may think that we're trying to single out TSM right now.
That's essentially what I'm talking about.
Based on what has happened. But we have to talk about TSM because they have been winning a couple more games. They have a new coach in Loco Doco. So I think they're the natural starting point for our conversation on NA.
Also, think about it this way. If TSM hadn't been doing poorly before and they hadn't been in a position worthy of criticism, then how could we possibly compliment them now? Nothing's changed. They've been winning games. While Turtle was always amazing as an AD carry, Glebe was an excellent prospect coming up. Bjergsen had a very wide champion pool that he seemed never to get exploited on. And, you know, amazing was amazing and couldn't be banned out. So now that they've done well, I wouldn't like to upset any TSM fans, so everything's the same. End of conversation about TSM. Now let's go on to the CLG part. Oh, wait, you'd actually like us to discuss the good things that... Oh, I see how... Yeah, interesting, yeah. We need some contrast there. So actually, let's talk in that sense, actually. Since Locodoco came on board, I think they've played like 4 games or something. I think that's correct.
Yeah, they're 3-1 in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah. So that was where they beat Cloud9 in the first game, I believe, which was
correct.
A good result. Then they beat Cole. I mean, nothing really needs to be said about that. They lost to Dignitas, and then they beat EG. Okay, so out of these 4 teams right here, there's 2 results worth talking about there, which is C9 and Dignitas. I don't really think anyone cares if they beat EG or Cole. They're the 2 worst teams by far. What did you think of them beating C9 and losing to Dig?
I mean, the loss to Dignitas was a closer game than it had been, I think, previously. The win over Cloud9, I think, was actually pretty important for them, because I think you have to remember that I don't have the statistic right off my head, but before that game, I believe TSM was 1-14 all time against Cloud9. So obviously, they've traditionally had problems with this team. So any win would be a big thing for TSM. So I think it was really nice, I think, for them and for morale for that organization to be able to take a big win like that against an opponent that they've traditionally struggled with. And especially right after you bring in a new coach and you kind of make that symbolic break and say, oh, we're turning over a new leaf right now. I think it was probably very satisfying to pick up that win, and definitely showed a lot of positive stuff. It looks like Turtle's performance is improving. But we'll see how it goes in the long run. I still don't think they're the best team in the LCS. They may very well be by the end of the season. Of course, that possibility exists, even though I still think it's a little bit of an outlier. I just don't think they're going to be able to fix all of their problems by the time the season ends. But I will say that Loco has done a nice job. I think their drafting, their pick and ban phase, which we criticized very heavily earlier, is looking better and better. It's still not entirely airtight. I think that there's still some kind of weird things that happen, but overall they ended up with good team compositions, nothing like horrible, and definitely some really good team comps as well. So that's an improvement also. And they seem to have gotten their play up in terms of consistency just a little bit more. Now, the thing that you and I have talked about on Twitter that makes people very, 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 very angry for some reason, and this is just taking a look at results, and the main problem I think that TSM has to overcome, and I'm not saying they're not going to overcome it, but I'm saying that if you actually look at the teams that they've played and their record, okay, out of the top 5 teams, because there's a very clear difference between the teams that are 8-4 and 7-5, and then 4-8, 3-9, right? There's a very clear break from the top 5 from the bottom 3. TSM has won, and TSM is one of these top 5 teams. So against the other 4 teams, TSM has only won a game against Cloud9. They're 0-1 against CLG, they're 0-1 against LMQ, and they're 0-2 against Dignitas. And this is really not a good sign for them, because if they want to make Worlds, they have to be able to crack the top 3, and they haven't yet taken a game. They are 0-4 against the top 3 in the league. So that's the really big marker that TSM really has to surpass now, and to show that they can play at that top level, because their improvement, and I am only gauging them by the goals that TSM has been very vocal about setting out for themselves, which is that they want to make the World Championship. Well, if they want to do that, they need to improve and actually take games off the top.
So I actually have the stats. I ran them for the 5 teams here who are in the top 5. So we have 3 teams tied for first, 2 teams tied for fourth, but obviously they're just 1 game behind the teams above anyway. So the top teams are on paper, there's a lot of parity there. But the big problem is this. Let me think how you'd phrase this. Okay, here's what people will get upset about. Is that whenever you support a team, you're going to look at what is the upside of my team's scenario, and I'm going to pin my hopes on that. And whatever the downside is, I'm going to hope that's not too significant. Okay, maybe that's something that won't matter later. So when I did the stats, okay, this is just games against the other teams in the top 5. Cloud9 is 5-3, they're the best. Dignitas is 4-2, second best. CLG and LMQ both 3-3, so 50% record. So 4 of those 5 teams against the other top 5 teams have a 50% record or a winning record. And then TSM is 1-5 against the top 5 teams. So they're not only the worst, the 5th of the 5, but they're by far the worst. And so what's the problem here? Because let me put it. I'll actually put it to you. I'll pretend I'm the person arguing in favor of TSM who's a TSM fan. Okay, Monty, and you can answer the question of how you describe this. So I'll say to you, okay, well the reason why they're tied with Cloud9 and why they're only 1 game behind people like Dignitas is because, yeah, they've lost to the top 5 teams, but they've beaten every bad team. And you know, if you want to be a top team, you should be able to consistently beat all the bad teams, right?
You should be, but most of the top teams have maybe they've lost once. We lost once to Curse, but otherwise, CLG is 2-0 on EG, 2-0 on Complexity, 1-1 with Curse. So, I mean, losing 1 or 2 games isn't a big problem. And I want to bring this back to Cloud9 too. This is why top teams still find Cloud9 so scary, is because Cloud9 is able to fight with the top, the best of the best. And also, people got very mad when I tweeted that TSM had a soft schedule. Oh, it's going to be, it's a 4 times round robin. Yes, that's true. But out of the games that have been played so far this season, we're currently in our 2nd cycle of round robin right now. And TSM has only played 1 game against CLG and 1 game against LMQ, 2 of the top 2 teams. But if we flip that and we look at Cloud9, you say, oh, Cloud9 has played 2 games against CLG, LMQ, Dignitas, and TSM, but has only played 1 game against Complexity and only played 1 game against EG. And yes, they lost both of those games. They were looking a little bit shaky. But in terms of that 5-3 record against top-tier teams in the LCS, they've got that there. And maybe they dropped 1 game against Call. Maybe they dropped 1 game against EG. But probably they're going to go 3-1 on those games, maybe 2-2 if they're unlucky. But they already have a solid record with a so far harder schedule.
Let me put it this way. Here's a good way to frame the exact same thing, okay? If I was asked to fix one of these 2 teams' problems, Cloud9's problem and TSM's problem, Cloud9's problem is not that they can't play their absolute peak level, because they're beating nearly all the best teams. They just have to figure out how to tighten up a little thing that's letting them lose to the bad teams. That's the easiest problem to fix. Now, if I'm TSM, you're smashing all the bottom teams. I have nothing I can even improve you on there. But against all the top teams, you're losing. And it's not just against one team, you're losing against almost everyone. So now I've got it's not even 1 problem, it's like 4 problems. I've got to figure out this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem. Like, Cloud9 losing to those bottom teams probably has more to do with Cloud9. Whereas TSM losing to those other teams is probably specific things that those teams have that we have to figure out. And what's more, they're all the teams we're going to play in the playoffs, because it's top 6 make playoffs. No one cares about who the 6th team is. It doesn't. They're pre-curse. Who cares? But they're the teams that you're definitely going to have to go through those teams to win this and to get to Worlds. So I think that's actually a really concerning problem if you're TSM.
Yeah, not to mention that due to the way that the playoffs work, they have to play a minimum of 2 of those, whatever teams end up being in the top 3, whether they're one of them or not, even if they make it into the 3rd place match to get to Worlds. And that's what's deeply disconcerting right now. And yes, TSM does look better. Can they make top 3? Maybe. They're definitely on the right path. But this last week, they failed yet again to beat a top 3 team. They will have another opportunity. We play them. CLG plays them this week. They also play LMQ this week. So I think that this weekend is going to be really, really important to the rest of TSM season. Because they need to start showing now that they can actually hang with the big boys. Or it'll just show how much further they have to go.
Okay, so here's another thing that someone would say, and I'll be that person asking in a dialogue manner. But Monty, Loco's just come, so those results don't count. All that counts is since Loco got here, we're 3-1, and so if we're 3-1 now, we're probably going to win at a similar clip. Forget all the results before. This is a new team, and Loco Doko's here now. He's like the 6th man. Thoughts?
I think it will help. I think it's definitely helpful to get a full-time coach there. I think Loco's very knowledgeable. He's a friend of mine. I respect his knowledge. I think that From my personal experience, and no, I wasn't there, and yes, being there in person does help a lot. But my personal experience of coming into a team in the middle of the season and trying to change things is that it is extraordinarily difficult to fix an engine while the engine is running. And you can't stop the engine. You can't sit there and take it apart and maybe, you need some new pistons in there, so you throw out your old pistons and you put the new pistons in or whatever, right? So you can't do that. You just can't do that. And so that makes it very difficult to craft the kind of team you want. You can't really reset people's schedules to the degree perhaps that you would like to, or set up a kind of team atmosphere in the way that you would necessarily like to in an optimal way. So you're just trying to do maintenance while the whole damn thing is running, bailing out the ship so it doesn't sink, but that's not actually going to patch the hole in the hull, right? It's a temporary measure until you can actually get some downtime to reevaluate, maybe make some roster changes, blah, 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 blah. So in my personal experience with coming into a team that had a lot of problems was that it was really hard to fix. Again, I wasn't there in person. I think that would have been helpful. Definitely would have been a lot more effective had I been there, but I still think it's a hard thing to do.
Here's the thing I'm going to make. What's going to be funny is this statement will sound like we're contradicting what we've discussed on all these episodes. So we've made the point over and over. Every team should get an analyst, even if it's a bad one initially. Just show that you're committed to the idea and that you're committed to making them part of the process. You're going to make them integral. And the idea is, if they don't work out, okay, we'll get another person. But we're making this culture that we're going to have analysis, we're going to have coaching. This is the way forward for the Western scene. With that said, it doesn't matter about the analyst and coach that you get in the sense that people are trying to make out here. Like, people are trying to make out like Loco Doco is the panacea. He will cure all the ails TSM. Everyone's problems will be fixed. He'll make their pick ban the best in the world. They'll have That won't happen. That's ridiculous to even assume. That's also giving too much pressure on Loco Doco. He's not a miracle worker. He's just going to come in and he's going to gradually fix things. Okay, maybe, let's say he fixes their pick ban a little bit. He tells this person, so okay, Amazing, for example. He tells Amazing what champions he probably has to practice based on what he's going to get banned out. So that will never happen again, ideally, okay? You'll never get this Volibear scenario again. Okay, that then doesn't mean whatever Amazing plays, which again isn't one of his mains, he's then going to just own everyone on. That logic wouldn't follow. He might be a little bit more prepared, but you can see that, again, Loco Doco can lead them to water, but he can't make them drink. You guys are thinking he's going to force them to drink, he's going to tell them to drink, they're going to drink, definitely, they're going to be so full and the thirst will be quenched. No, you can only go halfway, right?
Well, and even when you have a coach, you're still dependent on the players and the management and everything else surrounding that team. You're only a small part of the entire team environment, and sure, it's a very important part. But I feel for Loco because I was under a lot of the same pressures from the community when I first came into CLG, which is why I worked for them for a while, kind of under the radar before we made any kind of announcement and stuff like that. And it's not fair. It's not fair for anybody. It's not fair to expect that of a player too, to suddenly come onto a team and revolutionize them the instant that he hits Summoner's Rift. Right? It's a team game. It takes that synergy. So I think expectations on him are very high and are unfairly high, and it's going to take some time to actually see a lot from these results. Because as we're talking about, when we actually sit down and look at TSM's results. Okay, they beat Cloud9. That's the first time this season that they had ever beaten one of the top teams. So you could say maybe that's an improvement. Sure. Yeah, you could definitely say that. But at the same time, they still don't have some of these elusive wins against the top teams. So how much has this team actually changed? Well, 2 of their 3 wins came against these bottom 2 teams. So that was already what they were doing earlier this season. They had already achieved victory over Complexity. They had already achieved victory over Evil Geniuses.
So essentially, we're not even saying that the team hasn't improved. It's that, first of all, the data set is way too small. Secondly, half of the data isn't applicable to this discussion of when you're playing the top teams, which really are the only... Here's the key thing. I've made this point over and over. I'll give you an example, okay? If we were to talk about Millennium right now, which we're not going to, but let's say we talked about Millennium in Europe, the majority of what I would say would sound very... like I'm praising them constantly, because the contrast of where they were, what their expectation level should be, the level of what their team is like, and what they should be able to do, they've exceeded that. Now, if you're TSM, the level of where you're supposed to be is at worst second best. With your acquisitions you've made, these big name, you should probably be the best. Not only that, being the best in NA should be like small potatoes to you. That should be like step one of leapfrogging to being the best in the world. You have unlimited resource in the context of League of Legends, unlimited resources, unlimited fame, unlimited exposure. Every player in theory wants to go to your team and play for you. So as a result, it's the same as, I'll give you an analogy, okay? In something like basketball, if you play for a small market team like let me think of one, the Milwaukee Bucks, okay? The Milwaukee Bucks is never going to be like a huge place where they're going to get billion-dollar contracts for local TV channels. People are never going to be like, oh, I'd love to sign with the Milwaukee Bucks so I can go and live in Wisconsin, in a mansion in Wisconsin. They're thinking, I want to live in New York, I want to live in Los Angeles, maybe Chicago, maybe Miami. These are the places where these are the big markets, and for more reasons even than just the team, you see. So as a result, when a team like the Milwaukee Bucks even makes the playoffs, that's very impressive, because first of all, how do they convince people to go there? How do you get new players when you don't have much money? Meanwhile, if you're the LA Lakers and you make the playoffs and you lose in the first round like the Milwaukee Bucks do in my example, you've had the worst season you could have, because you had every advantage going for you. So this is the same way that people have to understand. This is the context in which we have to judge a team like TSM. Like, put it this way, we spent the last 2 weeks talking about what could have been wrong with Cloud9. Meanwhile, Cloud9 is fucking tied for second place, essentially. 1 game behind the winners of the whole league. And they have the best record against all the top teams. But that's still the correct discussion. What is wrong? There's clearly something wrong with Cloud9 in the context of their team. So anyway, I've set it up like that so we can discuss the rest of it. In terms of TSM, before we go off this topic, let's talk about some of the actual players. Because when I watched the 2 big games, the C9 one and the Dig games, you could see some differences. And also, the reason why the C9 game is interesting is because of the history. Like, they've played so many times. So you can actually go back and look at the old Cloud9 games. Whenever I saw the old Cloud9 games, okay, so the first split, Cloud9 was just wrecking them completely. Like, they had no answers for Cloud9 then. No one did in the whole league, okay. But in the last split, they were actually one of the teams where we thought they might even be able to beat Cloud9, or they were up there with Cloud9 at the early part of the split. If you remember, they had that big win over them. I think it was the second game they played them in the split. And what was interesting in that game was Cloud9 were always like, if you let Cloud9 get to the mid game without significantly being up on them, they would just win 9 out of the 10 team fights that you're going to have for the rest of the game. They'd always get the fights they wanted. And that's what TSM was able to do last split. They were able to get better team fights. Bjergsen was able to outclass High at times. They looked really, really good, actually. The whole team looked very strong in team fights. And that's what you didn't see for all of the initial part of this split here. They had this new support Glebe, they had the new jungler Amazing, and they didn't have Xpecial coming in and engaging on people and getting the fight they want, and having that scenario where, okay, maybe Cloud9 thinks they're about to get the fight they want, but then someone like Xpecial makes a play and then that turns it on for you, okay. They didn't have that at all. Well, in this game, that's exactly what they did have. From like the mid-game onwards, they were just winning all those fights. They were like uncharacteristic. How often do you see Cloud9 get picked? They did that a bunch of times.
Right, and I think that part of this was Cloud9. First off, I think TSM was falling back onto some more comfort champions. Thresh for Glebe has been kind of his go-to. Turtle has always been a solid Corki player, and they did first pick Corki that game, which wasn't a good first pick, and I was pretty skeptical about that, but it did get them a win. Now, fans, just because you win the game doesn't mean you have a good pick ban phase. People seem to not understand that a lot of the time, sadly. But Cloud9 was trying some new stuff with Rengar, some new stuff with Fizz. Fizz is a lane counter to Twisted Fates, trying to dominate him during the laning phase. Obviously, this didn't work out for them very well. Also, Braum was a new pick for that week that they managed to select as well. So it was definitely a shaky game from them. Meteos looked really uncomfortable on Rengar. But that's not an excuse for Cloud9. They still lost fair and square, even though I think they did have some strong early advantages to play off of. They definitely just got picked a lot, like you're saying, Thorin. Very poor vision, poor map awareness that game, and definitely didn't play to their composition strengths, and Meteos really had a bad game.
Oh yeah, that's something actually I wanted to talk about in that sense, because that's one of the reasons why, like I say, you never saw Cloud9 of old get picked. Like, they would never just run through part of someone's jungle and then find 4 guys like, oh shit, what's going on? Like, that's what other NA teams would do. They were the ones who never did it, because they always had division control. They always had the correct roams. They always had, like, people, like, even if you could start to pick them, they, like, suddenly you'd find out, wait a minute, what the fuck? High's right already here. He's, like, already come up from the mid. They could sense something was going to happen, okay. In this game, they would just get completely fooled at times and just not know what was going on. So I want to ask this question. One of the things we saw in this game was, unless I'm mistaken, this was the game where Amazing went for the early Sightstone. And actually, let me think, is that correct? I think it was.
I don't recall.
I'll double check actually. Yes, I believe he went for a first, like a Sightstone really early, and they actually had like a vision advantage, which you wouldn't think you'd get versus a team like Cloud9. What do you think of this in terms of junglers going forwards? 'Cause it seems like there's actually been a trend where people have been going that first now.
Yeah, I mean, he was playing Elise that game, and if this is true, that's not an awesome build on Elise. It is in terms of getting that early vision advantage, but it really hinders your ability to get enough damage down during ganks in order to create kills. I think he got away with it because he had a very strong early lanes with hard CC, with Renekton, Twisted Fate, and then, of course, the power from Corki and Thresh as well. So I think that in this particular more early game team composition, it was able to work. And if you get that vision advantage when you have the Twisted Fate, presumably you can make more plays on the other lanes more safely. So I'm not sure if it's something he's going to be doing a lot in the future. I generally wouldn't recommend it, but I can see how it could work in this team composition.
In this game, after the mid game, Cloud9 could just never get back into it, basically.
Yeah.
Did you, when you looked at their comp, did they just lose too much early on? Because the problem is, they were in that scenario where they didn't look like Cloud9 isn't a team who waits to outscale people and waits till the end of the game. In fact, that's the way they get back in games when you look at them when they're at the best. They do keep taking team fights, but they do that thing where you're ahead, so you think it's okay if they engage on you to take the fight. But they get you to get the fight that they maybe want or that they have a better chance of winning in, and then they can gradually grind their way back in the game. They couldn't do this at all this time. Every time the fight happened, they were going to lose it, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, there weren't actually that many team fights because I feel like Medios and High kept getting caught out. So they definitely didn't create the picks they needed to. And if you're going to pick Fizz as a hard lane counter to Twisted Fate, you have to work really well with Rengar to keep the TF down early.
That's the other thing as well, is that they couldn't create like scenarios. Like when I watched the game over, I was trying to think once they were behind, like what am I thinking their plan is to get back in this game? Because one of the things I've always thought is so good and underrated about High, actually, is he's one of those weird mid laners where it's like his entire style is to pick a fight and go all in on it. And he's probably going to die in this fight, but he's going to do insane damage to like one target or something, okay? Whereas if you think of someone like Shifter can lose the game and not die. Because if he sees like, oh, I'd probably die in this scenario, will we win the fight? I'm not sure, I don't think I'll go for this one. Like, I'll do a bit of damage from afar, then I'll get away. High is like the exact opposite of that. That's why it works though, because if High tried to play that style, it wouldn't really work, okay? He's not that sort of a player. But if he does that like super engaged style, when everyone backs him up and they all collapse in on a fight, that's where they can create a super chaotic fight that they can maybe win. They never really did this game though, right?
No, well, not that I recall at the very least. It's been a couple of weeks, but yeah, no, there's no way you're going to really. I mean, they tried late to have some team fights, but by then Fizz was just getting kited and blown up whenever he tried to go in because they had so much hard CC on the side of TSM that even through the Zonias, they were just catching him out afterwards and focusing him down while kiting him out. So it was well played. The team fights were certainly well played by TSM in that one. They definitely had their priorities straight in terms of how they were going to engage and how they were going to deal with the Fizz. So that was well done by them.
Bearing in mind, we have to talk, now we talk about TSM, with the context of Loco Doco being there, who in theory must have some input on the pick ban phase and telling them what to play or what not to play. Again, they probably have some say in it. I don't imagine he controls them in that sense. But on behalf of everyone else in the world who isn't from North America, A, why even play Corki? B, why would you first pick? I'm pretty sure every other AD carry who's really good from Europe, from Korea, was thinking, like, why are they playing Corki here?
Well, there were some Corki big games in Korea, but generally speaking, Corki is a very strong champion through his first few items. And his siege in the mid game is super strong, and his mixed damage is extremely difficult to itemize against for tanks early. So until you can kind of get your Sunfire or your Randuins and a Cowl item, you don't really have the best defense against him. So he does have some really strong mid-game power, but he does fall off harder than a lot of other AD carries. But it doesn't matter if you can get enough of an advantage. And in the last couple of weeks, TSM has played Corki a couple games. They won versus EG as well with Corki. And if you're good with him, he can be a lane bully, and he can siege very well early on. So it's not the worst pick in the world. I do think that the Corki first pick is a little risky, and I do think that TSM has been playing with fire a little bit in their pick and ban phase, most notably against Evil Geniuses. They first picked Lee Sin and let Evil Geniuses first rotation Lulu and Lucian, that's a scary couple picks to give up for a Lee Sin. I mean, Lee Sin's a good pickup, but you may not want to give those over. And had it not been against Evil Geniuses, that may have really, really hurt them.
So the big problem in the C9 game, if you talk just pick and ban, is that no one could get to Corki, and he was dealing all the damage, right? So there's two factors. But then you look at the champions that Cloud9 picked, and these look like these are good. I mean, look who they've got. They've got Shyvana, they've got Rengar, they've got High was on Fizz, and then they've got Sneaky on Twitch. These are all people who, in theory, I mean, you can get in there, and you should be able to get to Corki with these champions, right?
Well, really what these should be used for is creating picks. And unfortunately, they got outpicked by TSM, which was really the big problem here, is that the vision advantage that TSM had with the extra wards with TF really translated very nicely into shutting down Rengar, Twitch, and Fizz. So it was some good defensive warding, I think, a lot from TSM.
I mean, well, since people think we've criticised the guy, we haven't really, we've just been fair, of Glebe over the past few weeks. Remember, again, we're not criticising Glebe as just a player coming from solo queue into TSM. In that context, he's done okay. We're criticising him because he's replacing Xpecial. So unless he can get up to the level of Xpecial, he will always be a failure in that context, because they could have had Xpecial. I'm sorry, that's just the way it works, okay, guys? If you can't understand
that's how sports
yeah,
work.
maybe this isn't for you, you know, maybe like knitting or something. Knit one, purl one. It's pretty simple to keep track of as far as I can tell. But the reason why I say that is because, okay, in this game in particular, he was pretty good. He had flash plays, he had some really good hooks. The downside to that is, well, it's like that. It's like the way that you can say it it'll seem like a rude fashion is to say, like, you know, even a blind squirrel finds a nut eventually. But there's a Shakespearean way you can say it, which is like, one swallow does not a summer make. And the idea is, just because you did something once doesn't mean that's the level you're at and that's going to be like that every time. So the big problem I can see right here is, if I'm a team and I legitimately was worried about Glebe, okay, I think I'll just pop that Thresh ban in there. Now what? We haven't seen anything yet, right?
Played some Nami, but he really hasn't had... He's had some good games on Nami as well, but his champion pool does, at the moment, appear relatively limited to things that he can play at a highly competitive level. As in the last 2 weeks, he's only played Thresh and Nami.
Like, here's something I wonder about if I'm an opponent of TSM. You've now got two players where they have questionable champion pools, Glebe and Amazing. And so, first of all, people are banning junglers anyway, so that he's going to get some banned out there anyway. But you're probably not going to waste bans on Dyrus. Bjergsen, you might ban a specific OP mid champion now, but otherwise you're probably not going to spend too much there. And you definitely you're probably not going to waste any time on the AD carries, because the AD carries are also similar, and everyone's going for the same ones anyway. You know, depends what they're not going to first pick Lucian, most likely. Okay, so these are the two champions people are probably going to hard try and ban out, these two players, right? The support and then the jungler.
That has been... I mean, there have been some specific bans at TSM's mid lane. Obviously, Bjergsen, you probably don't want him on LeBlanc. We've seen a lot of LeBlanc bans against him. But absent some of these very specific high burst damage mages that you get out of Bjergsen's hands, most of the bans have been targeted. A lot of Lee Sin bans, because that's like Amazing's best champion by a lot. And then some support bans as well.
In terms of, it's a good transition to Cloud9 there, because I tried not to bring it up too much while we were talking about it, even though we're essentially talking about a big game that they played. When you watched Cloud9, I'll tell you the first thing that springs off the page from watching the Cloud9 matches recently is what happened to Balls. Everyone talked last split about how amazing Balls was, how he's this carry top laner, and they were right to a degree. If I had to pick the carry of C9 in the past, I would actually probably have picked Balls. I think overall, he just seemed like he was the player who would win his lane the most often, would really good contribution to team fights, always arrive on time. He was the one player you could always rely on for that consistent performance, you know. Some games high goes crazy, sometimes he doesn't. Some games sneaky plays really high level, sometimes he just plays okay. Balls was actually a very consistent performer before. In these games recently, he dies all the time seemingly. He doesn't seem to do that much. What do you think could contribute to this?
I think part of it is that the lane swap meta is really, really, really difficult for top laners right now. So you are much more dependent on your team's decision making to have that consistent performance these days. And if your team makes the right plays in terms of when you switch lanes, how you control the minion waves, the top laner doesn't actually have to be that good at top lane in order to have like a solid performance. So I think Balls back in the more 1v1 or the different 2v1 era where you weren't so dependent on the rest of your teams, like what everybody else did that may or may not screw you over. I think that's been part of it for sure. And I think that Cloud9 hasn't really been the best at lane swaps ever since like the 4v0 meta ended, which they were quite good at. But they've looked a little lost. But more than that, I think that Cloud9 has just been, they've been having problems like hitting their proper timings. They've been having problems identifying their goals in a way that Cloud9 has never really had before. So it's a bit puzzling as to why they're here right now. And again, we say that, but they've mostly been having a problem versus like the bottom three teams. They've had the toughest schedule of any team against the other top teams in NA. And they've also, we've discussed already, had that good winning performance. So, I mean, they're scary, very scary still.
Okay, I've got a statement for you, Monty. When I watched the Cloud9 games recently, yeah, I was thinking things like what's happened to Balls. Some of the picks don't seem to work out as well as they have in the past. Like, for example, Elimination on Brom was actually pretty lackluster. Usually one of the things about Elimination that impresses me is that you never have to question his mechanics, because it's like mechanics don't even come into play. He just knows like the limitations of what he can do, and he plays within that so well that he'll look like he has good mechanics, even though you know he can't be some sort of mechanical beast. Okay, so again, high, I would every now and then have a good game, but he was never the same high of last split so far. Meteos has had like a reduced impact. You can see he's not really like the MVP at this point for their team. So the whole team has problems, and yet when I've looked at their team and I've watched all the big games between all the top 5 this season, I think Cloud9 is still the best team in NA, even if the record doesn't say it.
I've been saying that too, man. I don't know what to, I've been saying that since we started the show this season. They're still really dangerous. I think that by the time the season has ended, High will have overcome his health issues. They'll be back on track. And, I've said this before too, but I think that LMQ is the team that's going to drop out of the top 3. Like, LMQ has not had a good run in the most recent weeks, and they just haven't looked very decisive at all. So that's a bit worrisome, I think, for LMQ. LMQ did win their last game against Cloud9. I think that was Cloud9, just their inconsistency rearing its head a little bit. But and also, of course, it has to be said, we are going to see much more even games between the top teams in NA because the skill is much more evenly distributed this split in general. So the fact that they lost to LMQ is whatever when they're still 5-3 overall against the top teams.
Like a key stat for Cloud9 and why I can say with some confidence actually that I think they're the best. First of all those top 5 teams, they're the only one that has beaten everyone. They've beaten every other team. They've beaten CLG twice, actually. And yes. So, most of the other teams... Okay, of the other teams, 3 of them have beaten 3 other opponents. TSM's obviously only beaten 1. So no one else can potentially beat everyone in the whole league out of the top teams. So again, that makes them... No one wants to play them in the playoffs. They're like that team, okay, to use a sports analogy again, where say a top team drops off to 4th or something, but they have the same roster... then you don't want to be the team who has the first pick and you have to play them in like the semis or something. Okay, they're worse than you in seeding, but you don't want to play that team. They are the most dangerous, even though their rating says they're lower. I have to say though.
That's why I'm still afraid of Cloud9, because we can be up against Cloud9. We can have a 7,000 gold advantage, and we can still lose that game.
That's another key point to make as well. the top teams this season, not many of them have been winning by comebacks. That's something that Cloud9 can still do, which I think sets them apart from the others. Now listen, they couldn't do it against TSM. I think they were way too far behind.
CLG has done that as well, but...
Sure, but the difference is a CLG type one is like you win the one big team fight that turns the game. Whereas Cloud9's the only team I think in NA at the moment still where they can do that scenario where they do like 3 separate events in a row that brings the game back. That's the hard thing to do because like it's more than just winning a fight. It's like multiple decisions correct in a row or identifying what is like the one way you can get back in this game that you do that the opponent doesn't have figured out. The other teams play a lot closer, it seems, in that sense. A lot of the other teams, if LMQ, CLG, and Dignitas play each other a million times, like 800 of those games are going to come down to like a 25-minute team fight where whoever wins that fight probably wins the game at that point, right?
Possibly.
I mean, think about how those games tend to go between those teams.
I don't know, because like I think, no, I don't think that's true. I think that we had one close game against LMQ, and we had one very dominating game against LMQ, and we had a pretty solid game against Dignitas as well, where there wasn't like a definitive point, especially in our last LMQ game. It was just kind of a slow build, slow accumulation of lead. So there wasn't that explosive moment, I don't think. Maybe 50% of the games, though, would be decided by something like that, but most of them aren't so... I think it's rare in League of Legends to have just that single moment where it's absolutely impossible to come back from.
Now, with all that said, the big problem I see for C9 is that I actually think, they're going to gradually improve. They'll gradually put things back together again. First of all, it's pretty obvious that in this world that exists now, you can never be like C9 of old. You can never go 20... X to X. You will never do that again. Because first of all, even if Cloud9 got to the same level they were at before, and obviously levels relative here because all the teams have improved in certain ways just because the game evolves, but even if you got to the same relative level, the reason why you could never be as good is because the whole point is, last season the only teams who could essentially win against Cloud9 was CLG and TSM, and essentially that's because either CLG could make a good decision or TSM could brute force beat them. Now, you have like 3 teams who can do that, okay? LMQ could make the most silly plays imaginable, but beat Cloud9 just on skill, just out-team fight them, just take a crazy engagement that they should never take, but they win it, you know?
Yeah, they're a brute force team for sure.
Dignitas to me actually reminds me more of CLG last split, where they've got like half... It's like in the games they win, you're like, oh, they've cracked it. They've actually got shot calling here. They know what they're doing. They've got good skills to back it up. Then in the games where they're losing, you're like, they have no idea what they're doing here. They don't know how to get back in this game. They remind me of the CLG last split. What do you think, Monty?
I think that's pretty apt. I think that they're still growing into their shot calling, and they've added some strong solo laners, so they've got some more raw talents, definitely a much higher skill ceiling on that team, like we've discussed in the past, but it takes time to develop your shot callers, to have them be, it's just a veteran status, being exposed to all of these different situations in games, because LCS games are always so different than scrims. Like, you can't really... Practice is so different than in LCS games. Every player plays a lot more cautiously. It's a lot more technical. You know, when you're scrimming for 6 hours a day, sometimes players just say, fuck it, and they just go ham for no reason. Or they're testing their limits, or they're testing new champions, or they're testing new lane combinations, or we're testing, new methods of lane swapping. And so it's not as refined. And so what you have to get practice like with and against is those very refined strategies and what are the right calls to make in that moment, immediately when it happens, when it has to be accurate, you lose the game. And that's just what you have to play a lot of LCS games in order to hone.
And then, so I'll go down the list again. The next one, let's say they play CLG now. The CLG they play now, skill-wise, I think can outskill them definitely. I think that's even debatable at this point in time if you look at how the two teams have played over the course of the split. Yep. So they're at risk of being down by the mid-game. And then, actually, I think this CLG is probably the strongest I've ever seen them in the mid-game. Now listen, they still make some questionable calls late game. Sometimes in the early game, maybe they make a mistake. But in the mid game, I think that's where the team themselves have been drilled enough to know roughly what we should probably do in response to this and what we should do here. So the problem with that is, it's not that Cloud9 have lost anything there. It's that someone else has gained up to what your advantage was. That was the advantage Cloud9 had over everyone, right?
Right. And I think that what I am most happy with on CLG right now is that CLG is a team, and you see these explosive victories, and fans like to talk about it. They're like, oh man, I didn't even think it was like possible to win right there. You know, CLG just decided the game was over. It's like CLG as a team right now knows its power spikes really, really well. And these are very subtle things about team composition or item buys that if you know you have an advantage, it may look like to the average fan that nothing has changed, but in reality, you have a massive edge. And what CLG is very good at right now is delivering the coup de grace, right, in a very efficient manner. So that's what's exciting about the team. Are there still other mistakes that are made? Absolutely. Like, I'm so mad about the curse game that happened this last week. I can't even like get into it. It was such shitty play from CLG. But I would say that is our principal strength. Also, we have our laning phase has gotten a lot better.
And then the last team they face is TSM. Now TSM, I think, is, you've seen all there. I've just given you 3 strong teams who have their own way that they could beat Cloud9 potentially. Well, the downside of the TSM one is that obviously their strength isn't as good as it was last split, so they're not as dangerous in that sense. I think the main problem for TSM is that I can still see one big advantage C9 will always have over them, which is that C9 is probably the best NA team I've ever seen at pick ban phase. They're incredible at that. Like, not just knowing what they want to get, but they do that thing where when they'll leave a champion open for an opponent that they want the opponent to pick. And the opponent does that classic mistake of being like, oh, awesome, they've left this open, pick it quick. And it's like that old thing in basketball where, like, if you're like a bad three-point shooter and you keep finding yourself totally open on the three-point line, that's because the other team knows you're a bad three-point shooter, and they'd rather you took a bad three-point shot than pass it into like the center who's going to score like a easy 2-point bucket. Okay, they've actually tactically prepared for what you're going to do now. Well, it's kind of like that. Like, I get the sense that. What do you think on the pick ban phase now for C9? Is it still at the same strength, you think?
No, I think that they've I feel like what C9 used to do that was so effective for them was that C9 was so smart at coming up with some really good like duo lane combinations. I mean, we remember the Ashe Zyra.
I mean, that was
Morgana,
one of the all-time
Jinx.
great ones, right?
Yeah, Morgana Jinx is a really high kill pressure lane. They were very smart about innovating, or like Morgana Elise combination where they would like skill Cocoon and Dark Binding to get them like very low CD so they could just spam them. Like, they had these strategies and they practiced them, and they knew they had great synergy, and C9 knew what they were good at doing, and they didn't give a fuck what you picked. They would just do what they were good at. And now we see them saying, well, I'm going to pick Fizz into Twisted Fate because it's like a hard counter, and I feel like they're not being as innovative as they used to be, and instead they're like falling into this trap of, well, we're just going to counter this champion with this champion instead of thinking what works for C9, because that is always why C9 was a good team, was because they just did what worked for C9. They were routinely criticized by many people. Oh, they've got a small champion pool as a team, like they just keep playing the same comps over and over and over again. But that's what made them really good, was because of their expertise, and they played just enough champions that you couldn't ban them out. And then they also played like just enough new picks to keep you on your toes, and they had very well thought out synergy. I'm not really seeing that right now.
So here's something to be worried about, because when you said that there, the way I would describe it is like this. Sometimes it looks like Cloud9 almost have like panic picks, which I've never seen from them before. Like the equivalent of like picking something either to make it totally new, like Meteos deciding to go with Rengar here in this particular situation, not a strength of his that we necessarily understand why he wants to do that. In the past, Meteos is a perfect example of one of these players who would just pick those same champions, because the difference is it's Meteos. Yeah. He's the best player by far at that position in his region, and so he could almost pick whatever he wanted. And if anything, even if you counter pick against his, which you don't really do that much in jungle anyway, but even if you counter pick against the champion that Meteos gets, as long as it's one of his strong champions, it's strong for a reason. Like it's an engaged champion or it's a tank or something. Yeah. So he's going to get that exactly the. When I say utility, I don't mean in the League of Legends context. He's going to get utility out of the champion. He's going to have something he can do with it that he knows, no matter what you've picked against it. That's why the Ashe Zyra lane was so famous. Ashe was not a good AD carry at that point in time. That was a stupid champion to pick. But they knew exactly what they wanted to do with it. And because no one had figured out an answer, then it doesn't matter if it's a stupid pick for everyone else. Because until you can figure out how to stop it, we're going to keep playing it, right?
Yeah, it was great poke. It was extremely safe. They had a very set strategy in mind about how they were going to play the laning phase, and that opened Meteos up to be able to put a lot of pressure elsewhere on the map before 6. It also allowed him to farm a lot more than he would have otherwise because he didn't have to worry about his bottom lane dying pretty much. It was very smart for their style of play. It was great.
So if we think now of, let me think. I think Dignitas is actually a good one to talk about now because they just had the game against TSM. Who was the team they lost to recently? They lost to a team the other day. Let me think.
They lost to Complexity. They got smashed.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so actually, one of the things I've noticed with Dignitas, I've made this point before. Okay, here's how I'll set this topic up when we talk about Dignitas. When you look at the games that they win, you look at it and you go like, wow, Shifter and Zion Spartan, what great additions they were. Like, they've elevated the team. They both do really well in the wins. You know, what could go wrong here? This team looks awesome. But I've noticed, actually, in the games they lose, people aren't going to like this as a criticism, but I feel like those two players, in a sense, like, play selfishly. Like, it feels like when they lose, they don't commit to fights where other people... For example, Crumbs will hard initiate with, like, Nocturne right into the enemies, and then those two will either not turn up to the fight or they'll turn up slightly too late and everyone will just die and disperse. And you do that scenario that I hate to watch in League of Legends because as a coach, it must be the most frustrating, which is part of your team wanted a 5v5, you engage, lose the first 2 people, and the other 3 get away alive, and they're like, it's okay, we got away alive. It's like, well, you just did, that's the worst possible outcome for us here. Like, we might have even still had a chance of winning that whole fight, you know, if you'd have got in still. Like, what do you think on this topic?
Or if you lose 2 people and they don't lose any, then they probably have a higher chance of taking objectives.
Just take Baron immediately,
Where if you take, like, 4 for 5, then nobody can get an objective afterwards, right?
Or they'll be so low on health for, You essentially gift them Baron by giving them the 2 kills and leaving like that.
Yeah, it's interesting because it is a problem, and we have seen players that have been too passive in the past. I think probably the best example, usually we see it with AD carry players. I think the best example was Score from the KT Bullets, who started his career on the Bullets post-Startail with playing very, very passively and actually outputting not very much damage in team fights. And he kind of was... I don't know if it was him or his lane partner or his coaches, but he kind of became more and more comfortable with playing aggressively and dying sometimes in team fights in order just to output a little more damage, which might, you know, push his team over the tipping point. But for me, it's a bit of a red flag when you can have so many losses with so few deaths from a player, because that means that you're just not committing enough. And when you're behind, being non-committal is one of the worst things you can do. Because if you want to turn something around, you really have to commit to a team fight, commit to a pick, and see if the other team maybe doesn't send all their members. See if they actually, you know, make a mistake right there that allows you to get back into the game. And I think that Shifter is a good player. I just think that he does, we talked about this earlier, his stats are great for fantasy, but there are times where I wonder if he can do more in order to help the team with the win.
Okay, I've got some good analogies here, because here's the first one I'll make, which is I've just made this point earlier. When I was talking about High, and I said what I think his great strength is, where he'll play that burst champion, and he will go, I'm going all in on this fight. Even if I die, like, I'm going to try and create so much havoc and have people focus me that, okay, Sneaky can come in and do a lot of damage. Balls can come in and zone off for everyone else. Meteos can now come in and start killing people. That's such a good style if you want to get back in games. And you want to sometimes, okay, here's the key point I want to make, okay, because it's a strategical point that applies to every team game I've ever seen, which is in games where you're behind, you usually want to take really chaotic situations. You want to increase the variance as much as you can. Now, we're not talking about when you're behind like 1 kill and you're behind 2k gold. That's not really behind. That's a slight lead. We're talking about when you're behind enough that if you both play out the game perfectly, you will lose. Because they'll never fall into your trap, and you'll never get that perfect scenario. Now, versus lots of teams, you can play that passive style and just go for that perfect pick. Like, if we get this one pick, we'll get totally back in the game. But that'll require a huge mistake on their part. You're essentially letting them dictate the game at all points in time because you're not willing to risk anything. Now, that can work. Like, listen, if you're SK Telecom, you might be so good at that style, you might be able to pull it off okay. But in general, if you're behind enough, you want to take a fight that actually you have a worse chance in, okay? In this fight, you only have a 35% chance of winning it. But why would you take that? You're going to lose it. No, because if you keep playing the game out, you have a 15% chance of winning the whole game. So you're increasing your chances by taking a fight. And not only that, because you have a worse chance in the fight, most teams will give you that fight. They'll say, oh, wait a minute, we have a 70% chance, let's take this fight. But the whole point is you're slightly increasing your odds of there being some chaotic thing that turns the game. What do you think on this topic?
Absolutely, and not only that, but it's a question of reactive versus active play styles as well. If you're going to try and go all in and force something, you force the enemy team into a reactive situation where they have to make a decision much faster than you had to make yours, and that leads to errors. And I think a great example of this is how Fnatic, the Fnatic brush, the whole technique of, oh, Fnatic's behind. They're just going to hide in a random brush on the map and wait for you to walk by and then jump you with a bunch of assassins, right? This is an active play. Now, Fnatic has all the time. They say, okay, we're going to get vision control over this area. In order to do this, we're behind. And then we're going to stack a couple of assassins in this brush and wait for somebody to come by. And then we're going to jump them. Okay, so you have all this time to set up this plan. But your opponent has like half a second to react to this, right? And
Sure.
You have to react very well. So it's a great way to come back into the game because you have so much more preparation. And that's another thing. It's not even just about the team fights that may be, 65% in your favor of your opponent or 35% in favor of you. So like you're saying, you're increasing your odds. But it's a matter of creating a more active play style that also gives you an advantage based on time that the other team has to make a decision.
Here, let's use the same example, the Fnatic brush approach, okay, because it's such a famous way of getting back into a game that was on the brink or you're going to lose it. Part of the reason why that's genius is because, again, it plays into a mindset where your opponent thinks, up until the moment you turn the fight, that you're doing a favor for him. So they're going, wait a minute, my guy isn't even in my lane, I'm getting free farm, or you know what, they haven't even taken this buff over here, or I've just taken more vision and they haven't been placing any wards in my this is great for me. Then I go, right, now let's push up and we'll take this. Oh, that's the brush, they're all in and now I'm dead. Now listen, it is a huge gamble. This is what people don't understand. Fnatic was too good at it. They made people think that it was like a high percentage play. It really isn't. You have to, if you don't pull that off entirely and turn the game, you just gave up such an advantage. You've just compounded how far behind you were by giving up all these things I'm talking about, like vision control. Maybe then they go and take the Baron if they kill 2 of you and then pull back.
Yep.
You've thrown the whole game. But you see how it was worth it though, because you created a scenario where actually they gave you a chance to get back in the game that didn't exist otherwise. By the way the game was going, you probably couldn't grind your way back into that game,
No, absolutely not. And like you're saying, maybe they don't even come by that brush. Maybe they just play it as cautiously as possible, get vision control around the Baron, and you're standing there in the stupid brush lane while they're taking Baron, and your choices are walk into the fully warded Baron area and die, or let them have Baron, right? That's a bad choice. But you had to take a risk, like you're saying, in order to get out of this situation.
So we're talking about Dignitas there. Okay, here's another thing I've noticed. I said on past shows, like when they were winning, I said I thought like a lot of the credit had to go to Crumbs. Because what I noticed was, I don't think Crumbs is playing that much different from last split. The difference was his team was quite bad last split, so he couldn't have that much of an impact. Like stats-wise, he was pretty good last split. He would have games where he did well. But what was he going to do with his top laner and mid laner? His solo laners weren't going to be able to do anything with what he could give them, Even if he got them ahead on a kill, they're going to lose that. They're not going to win the lane anyway. If he does a great engage, who's coming in to deal all the damage and kill everyone? Like, no one. I'm a cutie pie, maybe. Like, it was a bad team to be a jungler on, okay. So I don't think that much has changed. So when they were winning here, I gave a lot of credit to him. Like, I thought his vision control was really good. In the games they've lost, I've noticed they're the games where he's done really badly. Like, to me, their whole team lives and dies on Crumbs.
And a great example of that is when they lost to Complexity. And this, for those of you who didn't see it, this was not just like a loss. This was like a crushing defeat that Complexity just like laid the smack down on Dignitas. I think it was a 28-minute game. And basically, to tie that right in, Crumbs didn't have a good game. And neither did Cutie Pie and neither did Kiwi. They got just murdered, like massacred in the bottom lane. Complexity did a really good job of turning a gank around down there with Evelyn and just multi-killing them basically in the bottom lane. And I think the big problem on Dignitas right now, and to go back, is that Shifter and Zion won't take the risks necessary to come back into a game. So when Kiwi Kid and Cutie Pie and Crumbs all fall behind in a game, it's really hard for Dignitas to win. Like really, really hard. And there's not really an answer to that.
Here's the thing.
I think that's a big problem with their team right now.
We sort of made light, because it was tying into the discussion we had about the fact that you don't have democratic shot calling. That does not exist. There's the illusion that it exists to certain people who are being slightly ignored, who think they're having input to calls that aren't really okay. Like I said. But what's funny is when I see the games they lose, I understand why Zion Spartan thinks they have democratic shot calling. Because if I was their team okay, I would probably make Crumbs okay, the shot caller, something like that, or have him shot calling certain scenarios. To me, it makes no sense whatsoever how Crumbs can be hard engaging into 4 people with Nocturne and he has no follow-up from anyone. That tells me either Crumbs doesn't shot call and he just goes in like that, or he's telling people, like, I'm going to engage now. Like, there was this, what game was it when, what game was it?
I'm trying to, let me see if I can pull it up.
It was the game where they were right at the top of their mid lane, and Crumbs was hiding in the brush that goes to the Wraiths on his side.
It was the game against that they lost last week.
And he could have engaged in under the tower. The Cloud9 caught someone under the tower, I think Kiwi Kid, and killed him. I think possibly with a thresh hook. They killed him just as the tower died. So that's why Kiwi Kid was there trying to protect the tower. Now, Crumbs could have engaged at that moment, and they might have had a really good team fight that they could have turned. Instead, he did that classic thing where you wait like 3 seconds too long to engage, so that when he did his Nocturnal into all the opponents, he was too far ahead, and then no one else came in to help him. Like, they came in one by one afterwards, but that was an exact scenario of where any team with proper rigid shot calling would have gone all in on that. Like, everyone else would have just heard, okay, I'm going in, and this is just what we're doing now. Whereas that really did look like every person there saw him go in, and then they thought in their head, like, am I supposed to go in now? Do I wait a minute? Do I let him? Is he going to die anyway, and is it not worth it? Like, everyone was making that decision for themselves. And so you could see how far they were way on the map as to when they thought, like, should I move down now? Should I move back? Are we giving up on this? Like, there was no cohesion whatsoever. Like, that's something, if I'm Dignitas, I'm really worried about going forwards, because that's the sort of play where in the playoffs that's going to ruin the whole thing for you.
Yeah, it could be, and especially if you don't know how to run a comp like that. Dignitas hasn't, I mean, they ran Ari, I believe, that game as well, and they were this like weird, like all-in, like super pick comp that they just looked uncomfortable with.
And that's the thing as well. Okay, let me put it this way. It's a bit like that old joke of, you know, the thing people used to say when Doublelift used to play Tristana, that you're supposed to use the rocket jump usually to get out of a fight, and Doublelift would rocket jump into the fight to start fighting because he wants to kill people, right? That's sort of like the opposite mentality of how Shifter plays his mid champions. He always plays a mid that has an escape, and believe me, he knows it's an escape. That's his whole purpose. What he does is he comes in, he hits an auto attack, he goes for the second auto attack. If you even move towards him, he's like if there's a mouse in your room and it's come out of a little hole in the corner and you didn't notice it, if you just even like screech your chair back, like it'll go instantly right back in that hole. You couldn't even have got over there in that time, you know. Like, it's right over there, right at the hole. That's what Shifter is like. As soon as he sees you move even towards him, he's like Spirit Rush out, like Yasuo jump out, like what's it? LeBlanc, like moving distortion immediately out. Like, that's how he plays the team fight, right?
At times, yes. I think that he is dangerous in terms of his all-in abilities, but it's also true that, you know, I think one of his best champions this season has been Ziggs, and, you know, that's like a turtle champion, you know? Shifter's a good player, but I think that you're right to criticize him on some of these more kind of passive issues, or not wanting overly risk averse.
Like, there's even a way we can describe it that isn't like we're saying he's bad, okay? These are mistakes. For what Dig's doing, this can't work as a style of play. It's not a winning, it's not an efficacious approach, okay? But the reason why I can see a logic to it is because they've just come from Coast. If you're in Coast and you're Zion Spartan and you've played the whole game getting this top lane carry champion and you get killed instantly and focused in the fight, that's the end of the game. If you're Shifter and you've won your lane, no one else in the game has in this particular game, you get to a team fight, you cannot get caught by all the CC and killed immediately. That is the end of the game for your team. So they've been trained. Okay, I'll use another example, okay. They're like the mouse who's gone through that maze and they got electrocuted every time they went through the left-hand side. So they're just never going through that left-hand side now because they know I get electrocuted when I go there. But here's the thing, we've removed that electricity now. That electricity isn't there. In fact, now you need to go through the left-hand side to get out the maze successfully. But they're never going to do it because they've been trained through this brutal scenario to think like that's the wrong approach. Like if I died, I cannot die. And the problem with that mentality is you can't have all three carries do that because the other carry is the fucking AD carry and his job is not to die in those team fights. His job is literally to stay on the outside doing as much damage while not getting shit. So he's going to do that anyway. You two other guys can't do that anymore, I'm afraid. You're not playing with Wiz Fusion anymore. You've actually got like a good team now. Now's the time to commit and go all in. This is like, now's the time for the mentality of like, now it's okay for me to die if I'm Shifter, as long as I do so much damage and take so much focus that my other carries win the game for me now. Like, I know I don't have to carry the game anymore.
Absolutely, and Crumbs has been good about initiating and all that other stuff as well. So I think that's definitely
that's the upside. That's what's funny. If you were a layman, you'd watch these games and go, "Oh, I can see the mistake here. What was Crumbs doing? You know, when you went in without your team, you died. You should play more passive, mate." No. He's doing exactly the right thing. He's giving them the only chance to get these fights we're discussing. The fight where you get a one, it's almost on even ground, and you can maybe get back in the game if you win this one fight. He's engaging totally all in on that. His problem is that his team isn't following him up. That's the opposite problem to what it might look like on the surface, you know. Let me see. I think we've got nearly all the NA topics. Oh, I've got another one for you. Oh, here's a topic, because you know, I'll just set this out there, okay? People might think that I'm like a contrarian, that I just see whatever the prevailing logic is, and I think I'm going to go against that, just to have the opposite opinion. It's actually the other way around. It's that by default, whatever my thoughts that I've had first, when I then check them against what most people seem to think, somehow they always just tend to differ in a way. And I always think, that's strange. And then a lot of my work is like exploring the gap in perception between what I've seen and then what other people seem to think. And that's an interesting gap to explore, because why does it exist, or what's making me think that way, what's making them think that way. So a good example of this is, I really need your help, Monty, to understand what an MVP is. Because in my world, the MVP is the most valuable player. And I can understand that to be, for example, the best player on the best team who's won the most games, who had the biggest impact. To me, he's the automatic MVP candidate. So I'm looking at this league of LCS, and I'm looking at people who are winning these MVPs. And I'm seeing scenarios where, in Europe, Alliance is 10-2 in games. And off the top of my head, let me double check. I believe they've won 0 MVPs a split, one MVP?
Shook won one in week 2.
Shook's won 1 MVP in a world where Froggen is repeatedly playing a Nivea mid and winning all the games and hard carrying. Tabs is playing like the best AD carry in Europe. He's not getting MVPs. Am I missing something? Meanwhile, Millennium
Kerp has gotten it twice.
Are winning over and over again. And so I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, am I misunderstanding what MVP means here, Monty?
I find it very curious, the MVP situation myself. I think it's a little weird that Zhao has won it 3 times in NA. I think the first week maybe was just.
Here's the crazy thing, Monty. Unless I'm mistaken, 2 weeks that he's won were when they went like 1-1.
No. Just they were 4-0 in the Super Week, 2-0 in the second time he won in Week 3. But Week 5, I don't know if you know this. Week 5, every team in the NALCS went 1-1. Sure. And apparently Zhao was the most deserving of that MVP. I don't know why.
Oh, that was the week where they beat Cloud9 and he went 4-0-6 on Orianna.
He didn't do anything against us when he played against CLG.
Nope, he played Kassadin and went 3-4-3.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, man. And I'm not saying I know who would be a better MVP.
Well, here's one for you. Same game, CLG versus LMQ. Link was 4-1-16 on Orianna. That's pretty good. Pretty good. Yeah, it's better than 4-0-6 on Orianna. That's the only other comparison point.
We played badly against Curse, though. You know, we played badly against Curse. So there's like a strike for and a strike against everybody that week. But in my mind, if you had to, like, Zhao Weizhao definitely does not jump to the front of my mind as like the MVP of last week.
But here's the problem, okay? So these two players, okay, they play in different leagues, but they're both playing the same position. So in history, if we look back 10 years from now, and the person I'm talking to didn't watch LCSNA, this split, okay, and I tell him, yeah, Froggen was considered the best European mid laner, and he's like, oh, how many MVPs did he win in the season? None. Oh, okay. But over in NA, there was this guy, Zhao Weizhao, he won like 5. Oh, he must have been way better then. No, Froggen was much better than that season and was playing a way better, consistent level. But did MVP used to mean something different back then?
Froggen has been robbed of MVPs, legitimately.
That's the problem. Here's the point I was trying to make with that setup there. MVP, in the context of LCS, is not most valuable player. It's player... Let me think about how you describe this. Okay, MVP in LCS, NA, and EU is most variable player. It's the player whose baseline is a 5 out of 10, and this week he played 8 out of 10.
Yep.
Whereas if Froggen's baseline is 8 out of 10, and he plays 8 out of 10, the same level as that other guy, or he even plays 9 out of 10, he doesn't win. Because he hasn't varied it enough, okay? He's just being great every week. It's the same reason. This actually happened in the NBA, where people don't know this, but Michael Jordan did not win the most MVPs in history. He won, I think, 5, and then like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar won 6. And the reason why Michael Jordan won 5 is because even though he was the best player in the whole league for like 10 years, like after he'd won it so many times, there was what you call voter fatigue. When next year, every single press guy would be like, well, I don't want to write the same story like Michael Jordan wins the MVP. So if anyone else in the league played even close to Michael Jordan, let's figure out a storyline that we could give it to them, okay? So this guy's team, last season had 40 wins, and this time they have 50, and he's the best player. Okay, let's give it to him for that reason. This guy last season only scored 23 points per game, but now he went up to 27. Let's give it to him. Even if at the same time Michael Jordan averages 30 and his team won even more games. So you can see how there really shouldn't have been a debate, but they found a way to make the storyline. That's what I feel like they do with MVPs now. They just find a cool person to give it to. It's like the storyline being cooler is more important than the actual best player winning it for that week.
And I think that's extremely disappointing. And, frankly, people will accuse me, oh, Monty, you're being biased, blah, 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 blah. You hate TSM, see, you're on CLG. But I think the most egregious example of this is in week 4 of NALCS. Amazing won it over double lift. What?
Well,
Excuse me?
Isn't the logic that I just said right, Monty? He was so bad in the other weeks that when he then did good, it looked like, well, look at the gap of how far he's bridged here. Double lift was always good.
Double lift's stat line was 17, 2, and 11 on an AD carry over 2 games that week. I was super surprised.
Oh, and let's not forget that one of the teams that TSM beat was Cole.
Well, we beat Cole that same week. We were against Cole and EG, so fair enough. We were expected to do well. TSM beat Cloud9. That's definitely a more impressive victory. Just looking at statistics, Amazing had a very impressive stat line as well. But it's just that was my impression from watching it.
It's just a general trend I noticed anyway. Okay, the last topic I had for NA is Helios joining Evil Geniuses. The first way I want to talk about this topic goes like this. It's interesting, isn't it, how the second someone joins an NA team, like in 1984, okay, 1984 opens with this character Winston, and he works in like the Ministry of Information or Propaganda, one of those two, okay. Yeah, and his job,
it's been a while since I read it.
His job is actually to correct history. He goes back in time and he gets like things and he deletes that. Or, for example, there's an example they give where the allowance for chocolate has gone down from 25 grams to 20. So what he does is he goes back and rewrites history so that it's gone up from like 15 to 20. And so when you then meet people, they even say to you like, hey, double plus good news, chocolate's gone up 5 grams, good for everyone, right? Even though we all should be able to see, no, it's gone down, that's a bad thing. So what he's doing is, whatever the prevailing history is, they're gonna retcon everything to fit that. That's like what happens with every foreign player who joins LCSNA. Their history becomes incredible. Like Helios, as I remember him, was this guy who couldn't get on a Korean team, failed really badly on Blaze, kicked off the team, got onto Sword, was really
on the Frost.
Frost, that's correct. Went on to Frost, people said, oh, maybe this will fix things. Nope, really bad again. Even though he was replacing Cloud Tembler, who himself seemed to have dropped off a lot, so he should have had a real good chance there to look better than someone who's had to leave the game himself. Then he goes to Sword. Early on, they look okay in Masters, which we saw how funky some of those early Masters results were anyway. Sword does badly again, they get knocked out. Maybe they get picked up a bit towards the end, but you can see here, for the last year and a half or so, he really has not had a good impact on the teams he's been on. He has not had a good performance. But when you heard him signed to EG, suddenly people were talking like Bengi or Dandy just joined EG, you know, like the hype was ridiculous, right?
And we, you know, speaking as somebody, to Helios's credit, he is an OGN winner. He did win on Blaze. He's won many tournaments in the past. He has always had problems with like a limited champion pool. That's been something that I have criticized him on. I mean, I've seen a lot of Helios in my time. Like he was in it all 5 seasons of Champions that I cast. So that like I'm very used to seeing his play style. He has never been, and he's been a very middle of the pack jungler in Korea for most of his career. In the early days when things weren't so settled, he did win a season with Blaze. Very true. He won the first season. But ever since then, and he's also been he's had kind of a raw deal. Maybe not on Blaze, but I think the personality issues on Blaze may have been somewhat problematic for him and inhibited him a little bit. The mid laner problem on Frost was really hard for him, I think, as a jungler. And then Sword was a new team. So where you want to rank him and all of that, I don't know. For me, I can just go, you know, Cacao, Dandy, Spirit, Bengi. These are all junglers that are way better than Helios right now. But he does bring a veteran presence. He does bring veteran shot calling, and I think that's valuable. And certainly he has a solid knowledge of the game. Now, and also, EG is playing better with Helios. So there's that to consider as well.
Okay, but so before we get into the EG part of it, though, I wanted to set the stage of what realistically was a good history or context for Helios. The problem Helios has is that, okay, if you're friends with Helios, like let's imagine there's this guy who speaks good English and he's now just become a coach in America and he might be friends behind the scenes with Helios, but accidentally neglected to reveal that information while giving this criticism of other players on Blaze. Let's imagine this fellow happened to come on our show and talk about this topic without revealing his own biases, by the way. Then he would probably tell you, oh, you think Helios looks bad on Blaze because what happened was Ambition is an asshole and Flame is greedy, and they were sort of like forcing him. You know, he was run ragged. He was going top lane, he was going mid lane, he was having to pick champions to play against 2v1 in the top lane, and he never got to make the plays. He never got to make the shot calls that he could have done and been wonderful. That only works if he just got kicked out of Blaze now and he came to straight to EG. That doesn't work when he then went to Frost. Okay, when he was in Frost, Shy is about the most unselfish top laner in like the history of Korean League of Legends. This guy will play 1v2 for the rest of his life and not like he'll play 1v2, die 1v2 and be like, I'm very sorry I let the team down, I should have won that scenario. You know, like this guy isn't telling you to come top lane all the time to gank his lane. Like this is where it falls down. And then you go to Sword. Think about the wonderful players he had in Sword that he got a chance to play with. Some real talents, people who again, aren't known for being these greedy players who demand certain things of you. Not only that, the whole point of him joining Sword and then moving Watchover is that they were going to give him this chance of like, okay, we'll give you a chance to do some shot calling, to have this role on the game. And okay, sometimes it would be good, but it was fairly middle of the pack, okay? He was never able to make Sword a much better team. They were quite similar to the team before, quite frankly, and individually he wasn't able to shine either. So we're not saying he's a bad player, but what you're seeing is it's actually quite similar between the Blaze period and then the later periods. There's not that there's a little bit of difference in his role, but the performance is pretty similar. So I don't really buy that as like the get out of jail free card for the Blaze era.
No, I mean, I think he's always been a stable jungler, middle of the pack, small champion pool, sometimes has outstanding performances on the one or two champions on which he's good at, which is mostly Evelynn.
Now, when it comes to EG, again, if we put it in context, obviously that is a good signing. That is a good gamble to take.
What I also want to say about Helios real quick is that because of his small champion pool, back on Blaze's run in spring of 2013, when they had like all those games undefeated and he started looking actually good, one of the reasons why he was able to do that was that his teammates were drawing so many bans that he got to play like Lee Sin every game.
Yeah, well, let's face it, the one period he looked good in was when his two solo laners were the best in Korea at their positions. And like literally, Flame was like an auto ban on certain champions at that point. Like no one was going to give him 10.
I think Faker was still better than Ambition that season, but
okay, but that was like sort of a retroactive thing where we couldn't be certain at the time, right?
Well, I mean, Faker's first professional game, he pretty much just took a giant dump on Ambitions.
Okay, but the data size was pretty small at the time. Ambition still had the pedigree and all that. So the point is, like, his best period was when he had the abs. If you're a jungler, that's actually the perfect period for you. Your two solo laners are monsters. That's like why Cyanide had times when he looked really, really good. Well, that was when Soaz and Expeke could be the best in all of Europe at their roles and solo carry the lane. Well, unsurprisingly, you look amazing if you're the jungler there. Here's the thing. On paper, I could have given you all these reasons why Helios joining EG would be bad. Like, for example, the last thing you want is to remove a shot-calling element for someone who doesn't speak really good English. Someone who doesn't have much experience with people who speaking English, someone who doesn't have much experience of Western culture. These would all be really bad things. Now, luckily, the context of the team he's coming into is that Snoopy's been underperforming heavily. The team is doing really badly, so you have nothing to lose by gambling. You're probably going to get relegated regardless, or go into the relegation matches anyway and win that one series that gives you that contract again for next year. But anyway, you're in that scenario, so it was worth the gamble there. And obviously, at the moment, I think it's a good move so far. The problem, I think, is this is another move where people are going to want to say, but the initial results are quite good, therefore, let me totally unreasonably extrapolate that to the absolute nth degree, and he'll be one of the top two junglers by the end of the split, and EG will actually be in fourth place. Like, no, that you've gone too far there. The first part is it's not a given that it even goes beyond that. Like, what they have now, I'm not exaggerating, I think the best case scenario for EG is to come 6th this season.
Probably.
I don't think they can come 5th.
What also has to be said about EG is you can't confuse correlation with causation, which is the fact that one of the facts is that Altec and Crepo have been developing a lot more synergy themselves, and Altec is really, like, I think, starting to become an interesting AD carry player. And that has just taken time and LCS experience, right? Like, he's new to the team too. So I think part of it is that Crepo and Altec's performance has like improved also independently of Helios's existence, right? So that's certainly helping, I think, a lot also.
I mean, the other thing is, like, that's the big problem also, by the way, that EG has. EG was so far behind the best teams that they actually will need a massive leap to get into any sort of discussions that we're going to have on this show in the future. Because we've just talked about the top 5 teams ad nauseum in NA right now, because the top 5 is so close. The problem is, those other teams are so far... Like, actually, for me, it goes like this. That I think all of the top 5, in their own way, are quite close. Okay, let's say even if TSM is weaker, they are beating up so hard on the lower teams that puts them in on score in the parity. Okay, so the top 5 are all really close. Then for me, Curse was just on their own. Because Curse was the middle team. In a normal season of LCS where you don't have 5 teams all contending for the top spot, Curse would be like battling for 3rd place or 4th place, okay? That's where they could be. In the good weeks, they'd be 3rd or 4th. In the bad weeks, they'd be 4th or 5th. That's where their range they are. And then the 2 below them were just terrible. And so you had Curse in no man's land. The bottom 2 so far below it's irrelevant. And the top teams... It's only really a discussion among them. Now, EG, if they do really well, could get to where Curse is now. That's where they could be. They could battle Curse for that spot. But I can't see how they can possibly get in that top 5.
It would be really difficult, especially since we're nearly at the halfway point of the season as well, for them to catch up with that on that ground, not only in terms of skill, but just mathematically in terms of games played. Even if they did get up there in terms of skill, you would expect a 50% win rate against the top teams, which makes it really difficult for them to be in contention.
I want to ask you a question about EG. Here's the thing, okay? It's very easy when you look at a team like EG, especially with the history of their team in StarCraft 2, where they've been known to pick up star names, and then even when the star name isn't performing well, because he remains a star name and people will always follow this player, and he will always get exposure if he's in a tournament, they keep the star player for their marketing reasons. The thing that people always laud about EG is their incredible success as essentially a marketing agency for star names. They're not a team who picks up undiscovered talent that has never done anything and raises them to the top. That doesn't really happen, okay? Now, what's interesting in League of Legends is people cynically will think the whole purpose of the EG-NA team was as a way to allow Snoopy, Crepo, and Yellow Pete to remain in competitive play, so they're still being featured on a Riot broadcast, so we can market those names, because people are always going to want to follow Snoopy and Crepo, but without having the fact that, like, let's put it this way, if you kept that team in EU, you'd probably get relegated with that team. Like, the teams that come up from the challenges, some of them could beat you there. In NA, we've seen now, even if they finish in the relegation zone, odds are they can beat whoever they play in the relegation match. There aren't that many strong teams that can beat them there. So people will cynically think that the players themselves know this. Like, they'll think that Crepo and Snoopy agree with you, and that they're sort of playing along with the joke, okay? They're going like, no, I do play, I practice, but, like, I know I'm just here for the salary, and I'm here to be marketing, and I want to still be a good player. No, you have to realize, Crepo and Snoopy buy into the dream of what EG is, which is like, no, we could still compete. I think we could actually do this. Like, listen, man, we're going to turn things around, and you know when they'll make those posts, like, oh, that was a bad game from us, like, inexcusable and stuff, they believe that. They believe that stuff, okay? They actually really do think that it can improve.
They do.
Now, the problem is they're wrong. It can't improve, and for obvious reasons, like not enough talent in the team, the wrong players. No, they haven't even had... Helios is the biggest player acquisition they've had, even on the table. They haven't even come close to signing some big free agent who could turn things around, even though other teams have gotten players, you know. Like, I've no doubt, with the money that EG have, they could have bought one of Zion, Spartan, or Shifter if they were on the table, you know. They could have said, listen, if we're really committed to this, okay, Inox had a bit of a shaky season, but we believe in Pobelter, so let's get Zion, Spartan to our team this split, okay. Or let's get, who knows, go the other way. Let's take a name from Curse or something like that. So they could have made some moves like this. They haven't really even made any attempts at that. So do you think there is a disparity here between what the players think and what the organization is doing here?
I don't really know what EG was doing during the off season specifically. I don't know if they actually tried to make moves and were rejected or whatever. So I think it's difficult for me to speculate on that particular front. But I do think that Helios is a good addition to the team. It's definitely, from what we've seen so far.
It's not enough.
We'll have to see how it works out in the long term. It's a very small sample size still. At the end of the season, we can look back and really judge this, but it does appear at the moment to have improved them. Just like we could say about TSM, it does appear that TSM is performing better at the moment. And will they be in contention for Worlds? It would be a hell of a Cinderella story. It really would be. And they may be trying to make some roster changes again. And you're right. Theoretically, the organization does have a lot of money. It always has had a lot of money. So why are they unable to appeal to? And the brand has a lot of prestige across esports. Why are they unable to appeal to perhaps other top players in order to get better free agents? I don't know.
Come on, man. Did you really just say that? Like, I'll do my Chris impression. Will they be able to be in contention for World Spot this year? I mean, listen, if things go well, and any given Sunday.
No, I said it would be a hell of a Cinderella story, implying that no, I really don't.
It's functionally impossible for them to qualify for Worlds. There's a key term for everyone who's watching this show now. The reason why I say functionally impossible, it's not impossible, but if we have to consider everything that is possible, the show will never end, and I will have to spend 1 hour discussing every possible permutation of what could happen. So as a result, to allow me to live my life and do other things than this show before I die, which I'd like to accomplish, I have to say that it's impossible because it was a waste of my time to consider the permutations until they arise, okay? So all that stuff that people will tell you who are casters about any given Sunday night, that is just waffle. Now, in this particular scenario, the reason why I bring that up is because I get the sense from the organizational point of view that actually the organization understands what I described there, that this is the current situation. Like, okay, we've got this team and it's mainly set up to market these players in general. And okay, maybe we'll throw them a bone, we'll give them Helios, we'll give them we'll let them sign a challenger player. They can try and be better, but these aren't the power moves that you need to become better. Okay, these aren't the moves that are going to immediately make you much better. And the big problem is, EG has to decide a direction. If they decide we want to keep Crepo in a team and have him be competitive and market him and have the rest of the team be all right and just have an LCS team, as long as we're in LCS, that's enough for us. Then they're going about it exactly correct. Like there's a Lao Tzu quote, okay, that goes along the lines of like, if you keep going in the direction that you're headed, you will eventually get there. Like that's the scenario that EG's in right now, is that the direction is not that they'll qualify for Worlds. So if they keep heading down this path, they won't qualify for Worlds. If they really do want to be competitive, and that's not just something they say for marketing reasons, then it's inexcusable how bad they are, because they have so many resources. They're a team that everyone in theory would want to be signed to because of the history of the organization and what incredible financial stability and backing. This is a team that if they want to, they could next season be top 4 just in terms of the people they could acquire, etc. So what I want to see is, I want the organization themselves to show me that that's what they really want. Because right now, it's a bit like in sports you get this. You know in sports, Monty, where there's an old star player and he's like 34 years old now. And you and I know his best days were behind him 3 years ago. Maybe 2 years ago, he could like just pull it together in a big game and he could almost win and you thought like, oh, maybe he could still do it. But he's gradually declining a bit. But you know those old school players who are really great players, they never lose that mindset of like, no, like things could come together and if we just get the right run, we could win this year still. And he still believes in his mind he can win. He doesn't want to let it go, okay? But the problem is, you look at his organization and you notice that they're not like putting people around him. They've bought into the idea like, listen, let's keep the star player because he puts like butts in seats, but we're going to ride out the end of his career and then we're going to rebuild. So we're not going to spend all of our money now on a team that probably won't win. We're going to wait until he's done and then we'll rebuild, blow the whole thing up and rebuild completely. That's like what EG looks like right now.
We'll have to see at the end of the season what they try to do. I mean, frankly, there aren't very many free agent opportunities, unlike in other sports in the middle of the season. So until the big like shakeup after Worlds happens and people's contracts end, that's going to be the time where we will find out what EG's intentions really are.
Because the big problem I can see for EG as well is at the end of this split, people can say what they want about this. At the end of this split, the Pobelta and Inox experiment will have ended. After you've had this is one of the reasons why I criticized Nian Tonsil so heavily. I didn't do it after his first split. I waited until he'd had 2 entire splits, almost a year of play, continuous opportunities to play against different opponents, have a new coach, have new teammates, and ultimately not enough had changed that he was ever going to get along the path to becoming an elite player, okay? So if that was what was needed, then he couldn't do it. Inox and Pobelta, okay, people are going to say, no, Pobelta just finished school and now he can really commit and all this. He would have to make an astronomical leap to become as good as people want him to be for that team, and for the team to be like I'm talking about here, to challenge for Worlds, to potentially be a top 3 team in NA. Inox doesn't even have that fake excuse of like, oh, I was at school and I had to, I was in detention so I didn't do much solo queue, whatever the excuse was. He doesn't even have that. We've seen almost 2 splits worth of the guy now. So unless something drastic happens, these players, there's nowhere for them to go. Now listen, where they are right now is where they should be. They're good enough to be in the bottom teams of LCSNA. That is perfectly fine. I made the same case, if you remember, for Nian Tonso. I said if he wants to play for Complexity or he wants to play for Evil Geniuses, he's good enough to be the top laner for those teams. The difference is he's not good enough to be a top laner for TSM, for Cloud9, for CLG. This is the key point I'm making. So along those lines, I think at the end of this split, EG has to remove one or both of those players. I can't see them ever becoming top 3 with those 2 players.
Well, I think that they'll have to play the field. I would tend to agree with you, but it depends on who's available at the time and whether they can acquire any kind of big name free agents in order to replace them and see if something makes sense. Either that or they keep trying to cultivate talent from the challenger scene, which is another option. But yeah, I think that for me, it's like neither is really top tier. For me, the bigger problem is Inox. He just hasn't really demonstrated a whole lot of strength on meta champions, and that's a little disconcerting.
But here's the thing. Okay, here's the problem though. Inox, performance-wise, of the two, Pobelter and Inox, has clearly been the worst player over the full time they've played together in EG. But the problem I see for Pobelter goes like this. Pobelter would do okay last split, but that was when the mid position was very weak in NA. Now the mid position in NA, in the context of last split, is ludicrously strong. Now, Pobelter could improve 1.5 times his current level, and he still wouldn't be top 3 in NA at mid. There's so many players he's playing all the time.
Top is still really weak in NA overall.
Exactly. So you look at the two scenarios, and both have their own context in which it's hard to see not only how they're going to perform now, but even if they improve, where are they going to go to, you know? And so, okay, that's NA for now. In EU, the first topic that we have to talk about is Alliance, because here's the thing. You would have thought the way the splits have gone in the past in Europe, this last 2 weeks is when Alliance should have leveled off. They should have now had the bad run that then makes them back in the pack again and things even up okay, right? That's instead the opposite.
They're still 10-2.
They're the absolute best team in both of the LCS teams at the LCS splits at the moment.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more.
From what we've seen now, Alliance was already really good at the end of the last split, but if you remember, the real reason they didn't get further is because they had to left Fnatic. Is there even a factor that you would say that Fnatic being worse this split is part of why Alliance is so much better than everyone else?
I mean, I think that in general, Europe overall got a lot weaker. We talked about that coming into the EU LCS. Fnatic was underperforming. Some of these teams lost crucial players to NA. And so Alliance also was on the rise from last season, but Alliance is just, I mean, they're just a really solid team right now, especially Tabs and Froggen. So they've finally like made it past their really crappy mid and late game rotations. I mean, they've got a coach, Leviathan, working with them right now, seems to be doing some pretty good work. But it's also, I think, perhaps maybe a little bit. We'll have to see how Alliance. I mean, I fully expect them to make Worlds, and I'm going to be very curious to see how they do there, because there's a danger that if they go that 25-3 record or whatever, like Cloud9 does, that because they were playing against a weak region, that they just fall like flat on their face, right? When it comes to the World Championship, like Cloud9 did. And so I'm just really curious, because I don't think many of their opponents are very good, and I think that Europe as a whole is a weaker region than NA right now. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting, that's for sure.
We already saw when Alliance got really good, Froggen was obviously like the key central point of that huge run they had at the end of the last split, and that's when he was actually winning these MVP awards that I've kind of made fun that he doesn't win this season. This season, I think the games I've seen this season have been like a superlative level, even for Froggen. Like, this is almost more reminiscent of like Season 2 Froggen, where he's like so far above everyone else, it's ridiculous. Like, I think at the moment, I think I could say indisputably, I think he's the best Western player in League of Legends right now.
Probably, but I think you could always make an assertion.
You could always have made it before, but now who could argue with it? You know, who are they going to put up as the next name that they're going to say is there instead?
I don't think anybody stands out as much as he does. That's for sure.
I mean, he's actually at the level within the context of white people now that is comparable to what Faker was to the Koreans at his peak. As in, he can pick Anivia. He didn't pick it once as a joke versus a bad team, win with that and go, haha. He could pick it almost any time he wants, it seems. And not only that, it's the same as in Season 2. In Season 2, you know, when Froggen's Anivia was like the auto-ban champion, it's not like other players were picking it and it was auto-banned. It wasn't like Kassadin where everyone was banning it. You only banned it against Froggen because no one else would play it. It's the same now. Which Korean saw that game and was like, right, I'm going to play Anivia now?
No, well, we did have a Korean game played, you know, with Anivia, but it was a little odd.
But I mean, it's not. It's not. That's the whole point. It's not that he hasn't found. You know, when Wicked brought back Aurelia, and then everyone started playing Aurelia, and it became a meta champ again. That has not happened with Anivia. Anivia is not even close to being a meta champion again. That's just how good Froggen and his team is right now. That they can actually style on you with like a stupid pick and not a meta pick, and they can still win the game and not have any problems.
I'm pretty sure Alliance would defend the pick somewhat, but I don't think it's truly a defensible pick. I mean, it's in a last rotation pinch, it may be okay, but I think it's just Froggen being Froggen and being really good at the game.
The big problem I can see in Europe right now, when I did that breakdown of how NA was working, I think EU is like this. Alliance is clearly the best team, not just because of the record. Just look at the strength of their players right now and how they're playing, and they're only going to lose games in very strange circumstances. So they're like by far number one. No one's close. SK is number two by default, by the fact that they're like the most consistent and stable team who aren't Alliance. So they're automatically there. And then you've got like, for me, Millennium and Super Hot Crew are in their own group next, second, in the sense that Fnatic and Millennium rather. Fnatic keep underperforming, Millennium keeps slightly overperforming, and that means they meet in the middle, and then they're there. And then you've got
Kevin's having a good season though.
Sure. And then I think that even though they're all have different records at the moment, for me, Super Hot Crew, Roccat, and Gambit will all three just be continually swapping places in that position there. I think they're all like, half of their teams are good, half of them aren't that good. At 1 week they're okay, another week they're not that good. No one's really impressing me that much out of those three. What do you think of those three?
Well, it's interesting that Roccat is even in this conversation right now, because in the last 2 weeks, they've gone 4-0, and so their record of 5-7, like they were 1-7 for a while, and they've managed to kind of like desperately claw their way back up the rankings. And because of the way EU is very highly stratified right now, and that there are a bunch of middle of the pack teams in the middle of the standings, they actually still have a pretty good shot at ending this season at like a potentially top 4 position.
The problem with that is though, Monty, with Roccat, I have to use the TSM defense here. Roccat is 0-4 against Alliance, Fnatic, and SK.
Yep.
So they're doing a TSM. They're doing a bang-up job of beating the crap out of Copenhagen Wolves. It's the same way as TSM is guaranteed on that call win.
Right. And also last week they beat Gambit, which I hope we get a chance to talk about Riot and Gambit. Sure. Maybe after we go over the teams with the ULCS, we can talk about the whole silliness of that visa situation.
Super Hot Crew is someone where people have wanted us to discuss them on this show, okay? Here's the problem with discussing Super Hot Crew. It's impossible without setting terms of which Super Hot Crew we're talking about here. Because one of the most tiresome, banal, boring aspects of LCS to me is when teams play one team once and you have to wait X weeks until they play again. And so for 3 weeks, people will talk about that result as though it was an entire season in itself, not a single game. They'll talk as though like, oh, did Super Hot Crew beat SK? Well, then Super Hot Crew's better. You said that SK would win, you idiot. You don't know anything about the game. Super Hot Crew is one of the best teams in the world right now. They're on their... And because it takes 3 weeks until that guy goes back into his hole and rolls that stone over and like starts to eat worms again or whatever he does with his life, unfortunately, we have to listen to that guy talk for the 3 weeks, okay? There's a problem with Super Hot Crew where on their record right now, it's 6-6 and they're tied for 4th place, but they're actually 5th on the standing in the sense that like them and Fnatic are equally at 4th place. That's actually where Super Hot Crew was last split around this time. They were around like 4th or 5th, and then they went down as the other teams got better who were getting better, okay? Super Hot Crew this season is different than Super Hot Crew last split, right?
Slightly different. I mean, they have a coach. LS is coaching them out of Korea right now, so that's a big infrastructure change for them. I haven't really talked to LS much because I've been back in the States since he kind of joined up with them. But so I don't really know what he's working on with them or anything like that. But they have that change at the very least. I mean, they changed out their support player, and then I guess they're changing him out again. Don't really know what's going on there. So, I mean, they're pretty mediocre. If you look at their records right now, they're 0-2 against Millennium, 0-2 against SK, and if their record against the top three is 1-5. They've taken one game off of Alliance. They're responsible for one of Alliance's 2 losses, and that's pretty decent, I guess, for them. But it's been a while since they've taken down one of those good teams. I mean, the past couple weeks, they beat Millennium, I believe. No, they lost to Millennium. Just kidding. They lost to SK and Millennium in the last 2 weeks. They beat Copenhagen Wolves and Rocket.
Because to me, the losses to SK are the key ones. Because if you can't beat SK, that actually just suggests that, like, to me, there's some sort of tactical problem there. Because the thing is, SK don't have, like, the super all-star players. So if you can even bridge the gap in terms of skill, you have a chance versus SK. So if you're just getting crushed by them, it's like those teams who used to go 0-4 versus Cloud9. That means that, like, they're just comprehensively out-thinking, out-positioning, out-pick banning you. Like, you're losing before you even get to the skill part of the game. So that's where that, along with the record versus all the other top teams, does say to me that Superhot Crew's record is deceptive in that sense. Like, even if they manage to, let's say they pick it up and they go on a run now, and they finish 4th place. Let's say I'll even credit them somehow getting ahead of Fnatic, which I don't think will happen. Let's say they did it somehow though. If they finish 4th, I would almost guarantee that there's no way they're getting top 3. I think it's literally impossible.
I think it would be really difficult for them to overcome some of the more veteran teams in the LCS in a playoff situation. We're talking about best of series. It would be tough to believe.
Even just from the roster you can look at, and that's where their problems start. Because every team who's above them has either like a star player or multiple star players, if you're talking about like Fnatic and Alliance, etc. Or they have like just a really solid team with very few holes in it. Meanwhile, you look at Superhot Crew, where is the star player? Like, okay, Salfi is clearly a huge upgrade on Moops. He sometimes has a good game. Mr. Rallis has always had incredible hype around him, and everyone's... Here's the thing with Mr. Rallis. He's got this permanent get-out-of-jail-free card on his performances, because everyone just says, oh yeah, but he didn't have like a really good support player. So if he does badly, it's because he didn't have this good support player. And they keep changing support players now, so maybe there's something to that. But eventually, you have to be judged on your performance, man. You can't just keep doing this over and over forever. Like, eventually, at some point, you have to say your performance is your performance. You can't have these excuses, you know. And so, maybe he can be a star. If he isn't a star and there's an excuse there, well then you have to blame Superhot Crew for not putting a good support in there. Like, what do you want, you know? Like, people like Mithy were out there before, and so then you look in the other. So if Selfie and Mr. Alice can't be the one superstar every time, then this is why I think they will never be top 4 in EU at the end of the split, because then it falls to Mima. And if there's one thing LCS EU has told you, it's that Mima cannot be relied upon. This is the player. He's that guy. Mima is like the pro belter of EU. Everyone will tell you who's a player. No, I think he's pretty good actually. You know, like he has potential, and if he can just get it together and get consistent, he'll be good. Yeah, but once people have done that for 2 splits in a row, they're telling you they're not going to do that. Okay, Mima will have one good game, but then he has the 2 bad that he shouldn't have had. You know, there's something holding him back that he hasn't figured out, and if he hasn't figured out by now, I don't think he's going to have this eureka moment where it turns around and he's just amazing, you know.
It does seem highly unlikely that that's going to happen. And, you know, he's been around the scene on various amateur teams. And I guess he was on NIP for a while, too. And it's just, he does have the occasional solid game, but overall, it doesn't seem like he's going to be the reliable carry that this team needs. And you have to ask, who is the clutch player on Superhot Crew? And there's not really a good answer for that question.
No, exactly. I mean, especially
whereas on Fnatic, you could be like, well, yeah, sometimes, you know, Reckless is like, you know, you could say, okay, well, Fnatic doesn't have a great record right now, but Xpeke, Soaz, and Reckless have a history of making clutch plays in when it is really necessary.
That's another thing as well with the Mr. Alice example, is that unfortunately, let's say I grant him the premise that he hasn't had a good enough support player yet to give that bot lane a solid situation, okay? Then I also have to ask the question, which I ask of every player like this, which is that if you're looking good and you're getting a lot of hype on a team that consistently loses and is never in contention to be a top team, then I start to ask questions like, okay, does your style of play benefit playing that way in some way? Are you really that amazing that if I plug and play, if I put Xpecial onto your team now, do you suddenly become the best bot lane in all of Europe? If not, then it suggests to me maybe you've learned to adapt your style of play to playing with a bad support and still doing well, which we've seen with other players. We've seen players who look fantastic on bad teams, but put them on a good team and actually their level will go down because they can't play that selfish style, or the team will lose. You have an option either way there, you know. You can make yourself look, especially if you're in a position like AD carry right, Monty, you can make yourself look good on a bad team.
You can with some solid team fight positioning. A little bit harder to do in the laning phase.
Well, especially, listen, you're in Europe as well. In Europe there are no like unbeatable god tier AD carries. In fact, at the moment the level's quite. It looks like everyone's on a similar sort of level, right? If you did a tier list, the tiers would be pretty close.
Tabs and Reckless are still probably the best,
but then that second group has like 3 or 4 names in it.
Yeah.
So again, it's not like there's people outshining you and smashing you because they're much better than you and they have a better support. So again, I'm not sure it all adds up that someone could be that good and is just being totally held back by his team. Especially as, if that was true, then Superhot Crew don't know how to play the game. Because last split, we had this team called Copenhagen Wolves, who were a bad team. They were not a top team in Europe. They only looked good when other good top teams were playing badly. Once every top team figured it out, they fell to where they should be, they lost the matches they should lose, and they went into the relegation phase. Now, on that team, this bad team, their AD carry looked phenomenal. You know why? Because they identified, this guy legitimately is our best player, let's make everything about this guy doing the best he can do. Now, if Mr. Alice is really as good as we've been told, then Superhot Crew are fools for not doing that. That would give them a chance to win some games.
Or more games. I mean, they have a 50% record right now.
Protect the Mr. Alice. That's what you need to be doing right now, right?
Protect the Ralles. Yeah. Listen, well, especially with 4.10 coming.
It's not even a joke.
Possibility for AD carries to carry harder.
This is MVP White. This is CLG CLG Spring 2013. If that really is your one world-class level player, then you're a fool if you leave him like, oh yeah, Mr. Alice, I know you're like by far the best player on our team, but could you play like Son from OMG, just like a supportive AD carry? Okay, so yeah, we'll just let Mima carry this game. Is that okay? Yeah, it sounds fine with me, mate. Like, someone there's made a fuck up. Either the team's fucked up by doing that, or he's fucked up by accepting it. That's another thing, by the way. I made this point in the past about Froggen in articles, which is that if Froggen this year had stayed with the old EG lineup that he had from that whole 2013 year, which was like decent but like a bit underwhelming, they were never going to be an elite team. If he'd have kept that same lineup and now he's not winning and now he's doing okay himself, I would actually put some of the blame on Froggen at that point. Because at that point you've had some say in it, like you're really by far the best player, and so at this point you can literally make demands like, okay, I gave it a chance guys, but now I need some help and I need this player and I can't play with that player anymore. If you eventually at some point you have to take responsibility for your own career, you can't always be at the whim of others.
Or you say, well, I'm going to go to this other team because, you know, of course Froggen's going to get a lot of offers and have a lot of opportunities to play with a lot of different teams. And if he's not like seriously entertaining those offers or taking one that's the best or a better option, and almost certainly in that scenario, he would have a better option.
Well, it's the same. Think about that's the power that got granted to free agents in sports, is that when you're really a top 5 player in your position in like the NFL or the NBA or whatever, if you're on a bad team that consistently can't get to where you think you should be, which if you're one of the top 5 should be like contending for the championship, you always eventually come to the free agent period where your contract is up and you always say to your team, like, listen, if I want to stay, then I say to you, right, you have to build around me now. It has to happen right now when I'm really good, or I'll go to a team that's willing to do that, or a team that's already got pieces. So in that scenario, I would make this case to someone like a Mr. Alice. That's where I have the questions about how good he can be. Because if he's really that good, then either A, why is some other team not willing to upgrade and get him onto their team, in which case problem solved? Or B, why is Superhot Crew not building everything so that he's the star piece of their team? It has to be one or the other. If it isn't, then that suggests either he himself or the team themselves know that the hype is a little bit unjustified.
Or both.
Yeah, or both at the same time, exactly. That could also be true. I have a question to ask you, actually, about... Did you have a finishing point there?
No. Okay. I mean, are we going to talk too much about Rocket or Gambit or Copenhagen? I don't think so.
I've got a small point to talk about Rocket.
Okay.
Rocket is a great example of the scenario that I forgot to bring up about Cloud9 before. You know the incredible outrage, Monty, that we have generated on this show by stating that a dead man is dead. It's an insult to say that he's dead, you know. How could you say that? He's dead. That's so rude. You should suggest that he's just temporarily not living, and maybe he could be alive if things were different. By stating that we didn't think that Roccat had like elite level players at all the positions when they were on top of LCSEU, and by stating that Cloud9 doesn't have superstar players at every position, we're fools. We don't know anything about the game. We've insulted some of the best. We've said that those players, not only have we said they're not the best, but the implication is that they are absolute dog shit who don't even deserve to lick the boots of a Mr. Alice or a Crumbs, you know. That's essentially, apparently, what I'm being told that we've been saying. I didn't remember us saying that. I thought we said something quite different. I'll use
especially
Roccat.
in a team game where there have been so many different teams that have won championships throughout history. Some of them have a bunch of star players who are the best at their positions, and some of them just have a bunch of guys who really know how to play their role and play a strategy on a team and just be like have really high team synergy without outstanding individual play. They share the load.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, here's the reason why I bring that example up, though. If you look at Cloud9 now, you have the same problem that you had with SK Telecom when they fell off, okay? Because remember, SK Telecom is the ultimate example of the team where people said every position was the best. I always make this point. One player can have a dip in form. Players' forms usually aren't connected at all. Like one player, so for example, Link has had periods where he had 2 bad weeks when the rest of the team was doing really well. Like actually that was when Doublelift's peak was, and so it either made up for it or they won games regardless of him having his bad week at that point in time. Meanwhile, another player can drop off and his team can go to the absolute top, or he can have his absolute peak at the wrong time and his team does really badly at that period in time. So Forgiven's a good example. His absolute peak as a player came when Copenhagen Wolves were doing some of their worst plays and doing their worst weeks and losing loads of games. Usually, players' individual peaks are very specific to them and for reasons that concern only that player himself. It will play into the team element, but that's indirect, it's connection, okay? The problem with this is that fans associate a correlation between if the team is winning as to whether that individual player is playing at his peak or not. And so in the SKT example, when SKT entirely fell off, you had people trying to literally say that 4 out of the 5 players woke up one day and were just 50% worse at the game. That is a ludicrous premise, that they just woke up one day and they were just all worse. All of them. That is insane. Like team games don't work like that. And the problem with this scenario is they didn't just do it for SKT, they do it for all these teams. So remember, people were telling us Roccat had players at this position, this position, this position, this position. Worst one's Cloud9. Because even when Cloud9 were at their peak, they didn't have these superstar all-star players. Like, anyone who thinks that...
Except for Meteos.
No, okay. That's what's funny, is when you look at Cloud9 being bad now, Meteos is probably the one player who you can see who has had like a significant drop-off in level of play. Not that he's bad, but he's not carrying now. He's not like by far the best player at his position like he was before. The other players, it's very gradual. It's hard to even make a case, okay? When I made that case about Balls dropping off, to me it looks like he's played much worse, but you make good points about how the meta changes affect how different it was. For example, last split I've always made the case that Meteos used to live in Balls' lane for the first 10 minutes, and so as a result Balls is always ahead or even, or he's never getting like 2v1 dove like Shy and Flame do every game, okay? In the same way, okay, High's playing a bit worse now. We can see that he's not having as big an impact. But actually, he still has some great, fantastic, like, all-in plays, and he still does awesome escapes and the moves that are incredible. It's hard to see how much they've dropped off. So I don't believe that Cloud9 woke up and all their players have dropped off the thing like this. To me, they're the same players they were before. The team aspect is what's fucking up right now. I don't think I wouldn't change a player on Cloud9 right now, even if they are in this position. It's the small... Something about their decision making at a certain point in the game, or something that's off a little bit in terms of like their own confidence in what they're going to pick when they come into the game. Cloud9 right now, I don't think anyone would put their players in the top 2 at their position in NA. Meteos is maybe the only one who's questionable right now, right?
Yes, definitely. Well, maybe you could make a case for...
Sneaky.
I'm trying to think. Yeah, maybe Sneaky.
But even then, people are probably going to say maybe I'm a Cutie Pie this season, or maybe Wild Turtle
definitely.
Resurgence.
I'm just trying to think of like.
No, I think that's
possibly
Vasily. The problem with his is that his position's quite stacked at the moment, so it's harder for him. But in general, you can see here, it's not that Cloud9 have just gone or they're all terrible now. And again, that's another thing. Part of the reason why people would always say that they were so good is because they were so high on solo queue and they play solo queue all the time. Like, well, they're still playing solo queue, guys. What's wrong? Play another hour solo queue. Don't you want to be the best in it again? It's a ridiculous premise. And so I just wanted to bring this up because, to me, that's the key thing to understand here. All you should be looking at is what's going wrong in the game. It's not individual performance that is costing Cloud9 right now, except perhaps with Meteos, because with Meteos, there is this case where it is strange what's happened to his champion pool. Like, I wonder what's going on in his head as to what he thinks is wrong, because it does seem like he's the one person where I could see there being a change. But then again, if his solo laners never win, how is he supposed to be Meteos of old?
Right. It does make it a lot harder.
But the reason why I brought it up in the Roccat sense is because Rockat's a really extreme example of that. They're an example where now, come on man, I don't think people would put any of their players in the top 2 of their position in Europe. In fact, I'm pretty certain they wouldn't.
No, I mean, even after Overpower got the MVP last week, and he did have like a 20 KDA or something like that in the last week. But, I mean, if we look at the matches that Roccat played in the last couple of weeks, they played Visa-starved Gambit. They played Millennium, which is a decent win for them. And they played Copenhagen Wolves and Super Hot Crew. Like, it wasn't a particularly challenging schedule.
I mean, I just thought that was a point to make, because the key thing we're making the point of there is not even just about those teams. It's showing how you understand the context to analyze a team. You can't just go like he's winning, he's doing better, this guy's losing, he's doing worse. Like you can do that, but it won't lead you anywhere. That will be like a futile effort, and you will never get closer to understanding the game, because you'll get in scenarios where you'll think like, oh yeah, what SK Telecom? Here's a good example I gave you before. Okay, let me think how I was going to phrase this. When I said the point about Loco Doco, I forgot to make this point earlier, so let me do it now. The reason why Loco Doco can't have an enormous effect on TSM is because, like I said, the players have to meet him halfway. He can do his part, but then if they can't implement what he's doing, like maybe they're not capable of it, or their individual levels are not high enough to make what he wants to do work in the end, then you can't...
Or they have bad attitudes.
Yeah, similar. The reason why he can't be this, he isn't a 6th man that's going to be, in that sense, such an impact, is because think of this. Last year, everyone in the world would have told me, Coma is a genius. This guy created this team, he knew exactly what he wanted. Then every step of the way, they always had the strategy, they always had the picks, they always knew how to work together, they had the best team fight, they had the best mid-game, they knew everything they wanted to do, and at every stage they were prepared, and what wonderful coaching this is. Okay, so not only did SK Telecom all wake up on that morning when like the cock crowed in the SK Telecom house, Bengi waked up, I feel kind of bad right now, like I'm not very good at League of Legends anymore. Really? Because I feel the same way, said Piglet. Do you guys feel bad too? I feel like I've dropped at least 50%, said Impact. Faker woke up. I'm alright. What's wrong with you guys? We're all just bad now. Not only that, they run into the breakfast room to have breakfast where the women's cook their breakfast, okay? They all run to the dinner table, and then Coma comes in, and they go, oh, there's something wroong with him as well. Oh no, the coach is down with the sickness too. The badness.
The skill vampires came in the night.
See, this is the thing. I don't believe that Coma just magically doesn't understand this current game, and he's like, oh, you know what? I used to understand League of Legends, but now I don't know what I'm doing. I'd imagine, actually, out of all those examples, he's probably the most consistent because he doesn't play in the game. So individually, it's not the same factors affecting you. As long as his way of breaking the game down makes sense, I'd imagine he's coaching them in a similar way. He's giving them similar advice. He's actually probably figuring out some of their problems, but they just can't implement it, or other teams are better in that area, so even implementing it doesn't matter. That's another thing to make the point of. Even if TSM improves relative to where they are now, look at every other team in the league. They also have the potential for improvement. Dignitas can potentially get just as good relative to where they were as TSM were still. They're a very new lineup. LMQ have a fucking million miles worth of shot calling hole to fill up that they could fill up even slightly and be much better. Cloud9 have a few holes that if they fill, they're going to be better. CLG have a guy who plays top lane who's hardly like knocking it out the park every week. Everyone above them also has the potential to improve. So even if TSM improve, everyone else can improve the same amount, and just the water level can rise. Here's the problem: you're not just playing static teams. Thoughts on that topic?
Absolutely correct. I mean, there's not much more to add to that. Everybody's trying to improve. Everybody's going to continue improving. So You can't just pretend like you have to work or improve it double the rate in order to close that gap. And especially in a season where everybody's so active about working, I think in the off season, one of the reasons why CLG improved so much from last year to this one is we spent a lot of time between Worlds and the start of the spring split scrimming, way more than other teams. You want to know a team that didn't scrim like hardly at all? Vulcan, XDG. Look what happened to them. Okay, that's when you have the time to actually fix your problems, break it down, get some practice that maybe other teams don't have, and continuously improve. When everybody's busting their ass to make it to Worlds, it's really hard to like magically overtake people. I do think Dignitas' improvement has been pretty remarkable, however.
I had a point to make there. I'm trying to think what it was. Oh, I tell you a really bizarre point. Okay, I made this joke on Twitter. It was half joke, half serious. I was just sort of being cynical, which is that reading AMAs of Korean pros, especially any that have retired or aren't playing at the top anymore, is almost like an exercise in Western fans patting themselves on the back. Because I've given this example before. Okay, let me just put it like this. You remember at Worlds, that feature they did where Hotshot GG had been playing LeBlanc on solo queue a lot, and so they asked Faker, hey, what do you think of Hotshot on LeBlanc? And he said, oh, Hotshot does amazing things when I see him. I think he's better than me. Anyone who thinks that that was a real statement, like, I've got a whole bunch of bridges in America that I can give you. Like, there's one over Brooklyn I've got going for a sweet price. Like, that what would be beautiful about that is I could understand how someone could naively still believe that to this day. But you remember at the beginning of the next split when CLG had to emergency draft in Hotshot. So what they did is he'd been playing a lot of mid lane, so they let him play mid lane, and he picked LeBlanc. Hey, what do you know? And how did that game go? Did he dominate? Was he like Goong on LeBlanc? Was he owning everyone? No, I don't think he was he? He looked like not even close to the level of Faker on LeBlanc. It's almost as though Faker knew that this was a beloved Western figure and that he gained nothing by saying, I think the Faker is shit. I think Hotshot is shit, and I would probably crush his skull beneath my mighty boot. Like, he gained nothing. Faker is already God, so he thought, you know what? I am a gracious God. I will allow you to believe that you actually exist and are not an ant before my might, and I will lie and tell some sad little NA fanboy that this guy, who isn't even going to play competitively, so it's the ideal get out, is actually decent. Like, no, I think that America is a good country. Babe Ruth, baseball, and, you know, like, it was that sort of ridiculous statement. But the reason why I bring this up is because I've noticed it happens in every one of these AMAs. What happens is people make the mistake of asking the Korean pro, is X good? Now, in that context, I've never seen them say no. So they asked, like, Rapid Star, like about 1 million people, oh, is Skara good? Yes, Skara is good player. Like, what about Reginald? Good player. I remember he used to be very good when I played him. Like, he's never going to say they're bad. And the reason why I bring this up is because a very weird one just happened in this Lost Boy AMA where he repeatedly kept hyping Millennium. Did you see that?
Yes.
He was asked what teams had the best chance at Worlds, and he picked Millennium over like Cloud9 or someone.
No, over Alliance.
Oh, no, I'll check it now. Actually, there was. Let me see.
It was either over Alliance or SK. That was really weird. And Cloud9 too. And he said like TSM and CLG. I mean, those just based on historical results, those are not the teams that you would pick, right? You'd pick Cloud9.
Let me see. Okay, here. The question was, which Western teams do you think can challenge at Worlds? By the way, keyword there, challenge. Not even qualify. Challenge. He picked 5 teams. TSM, Dignitas, CLG, Millennium, Alliance. So in Lost Boys world, C9 and SK aren't even a factor here. Even though they're 2 teams that, listen, outside of Alliance, I would put my money on SK and CLG to make it to Worlds.
You mean C9?
Yeah, C9 and SK. They're the 2 teams where they're just the consistency with which they can do well against every level of team. Like, I can't see them not getting there. It would take a lot for them not, okay. And he doesn't even factor them in. That's just ludicrous to me. I just thought I'd
Especially
bring that up.
if you look at the record of C9O the last couple of seasons, and they really had nowhere to go but down. They were just absolutely crushing North America for the last 2 seasons. And yeah, eventually they're going to have a season where they don't totally crush it, but they still have a really good chance to win.
Oh, by the way, I know you love this feature, Monty, and I'm going to make it a regular feature because these things keep happening. It's time for the third installment of the Jat Dilemma. Are you ready?
Oh, God.
It always has to come back again because listen, Jat's a figure of authority who speaks, and when he makes points in games where I'm thinking it's a very interesting point. I'll make a mental note of that and I'll see how it fixed later. So you remember that the criticism you could always give of EU went like this: well, EU must be weak because if all the teams who are near the top have like a similar record and they keep beating each other, where's the consistency, man? You win one game, you lose to the team next week. Where's the consistency? I think that overall they're probably all just average, and that's why they're all at a similar level. Then you look at NA this season. Top 3 teams all tied. Next 2 tied. The fourth place teams 1 game from the top. What is the conclusion to be drawn from this? NA is stronger than it has ever been before. All these teams are so good they can beat each other. We are at the best. We are at the zenith of our accomplishments. Meanwhile, in EU, I'll set up the other side of the Jat Dilemma there. Cloud9 dominating NA, beating almost everyone, looking unbeatable, win every lane. Players just a clear MVP above everyone else. Cloud9 are a very strong team. They will represent North America very well at Worlds. Now we go to this split. Alliance, beating everyone. Top of the league. Very strong MVP caliber carrier. I think he's probably playing against weaker opponents. The league isn't very good over there this year. Even if they do well, I can't see them doing well at Worlds. You know, they probably go out in the round of 8 or so. Like, these dilemmas, I love them, Monty. I just like to set them up for you. Like, do you have any comment on episode 3 in the dilemma?
Oh, well, I don't know what Jat did or did not say about these things, so...
I don't know. Listen, I don't know if that he said those explicit things, but I just characterize it as the Jat dilemma because he's done these things before. So it's within the wheelhouse of that sort of thinking, you know, applied to the modern case.
Okay, fair enough. But I think that what we learned was that from previous seasons was that actually the level of competition in Europe was quite high, and that comparatively the level of competition in NA was quite low when there was one team dominating to that degree. And I think that's typically going to be more likely. I think that when you have a bunch of average teams, it's really easy for one team to like jump out at like really far ahead of the rest of them. And I think that that's much more. I think that NA. I don't know. Alliance is a strong team, so it's really hard to say how Worlds is going to go this year. But I do think that the level of competition in NA will help significantly in the preparation for Worlds. Now, I think a lot of it is going to depend on what Alliance does before Worlds, if they boot camp really hard or if they get some like more competitive practice, and they really need to test themselves, I think, in that capacity.
That's another thing also, by the way, as just a quick side note that I forgot to mention before about Cloud9, is that when we talk about Cloud9 struggling, part of it isn't just Cloud9, it's that the other teams are better. So when I watched all those games of Cloud9 when they were dominating, when they were in their absolute peak, first of all, the reason they could do those 3-0 weeks is not because they played lights out in every game, it's because as long as they beat the big team they played that week, say they beat CLG or they beat TSM, then in the next game they were playing against Velocity, and then they were playing against, you know, someone like that, or they were playing Curse or Dignitas. So even if they were playing, like Curse and Dignitas were good teams, but they were always going to give you chances in those games. So in some sense, mistakes from Cloud9 were way less emphasized, and their opponents would give them these free opportunities to come back into games. If you're playing against LMQ now, and they get on top of you in the first 20 minutes, and Zhao Wei Zhao is like 2-0-4, you're not going to come back into that game. Like at that point, you're going to have to. It's going to be miraculous for you to win this game at this point in time. If your laners are all down and you're Cloud9, because you're not going to have that insane, ridiculous super outplay of someone against that. Like they're too far ahead and they have the skill advantage on you. Like these teams didn't exist before to play against Cloud9 in that sense, right?
No, they didn't, and especially because the arrival of LMQ prompted like Dignitas and Coast to merge most of their strong elements together into a new team. They have a much more solid laning phase now, and that isn't something that Cloud9 is really having used to having to deal with either.
That's actually the funny thing that I think about Cloud9's scenario, is that, listen, at the moment, I still think it's possible for them to win NA and still be top. So as a result, maybe they don't have to make a change. Maybe they can be content with being just a bit ahead of people and winning on consistency. That could be enough, okay. But I've always said that the way the metagame, there's two metagames that exist. There's the actual metagame based on what is going on in the game right now that are effective strategies. And there's actually a metagame of how you create your roster. And this has always carried through every team sport, which is that whichever team is the number one team and is dominating, essentially everyone else changes their approach to building their team, to building teams that can compete with that dominating team, because they're the one team you have to now be able to beat. Well, you've seen this in NA. Every team has first of all upgraded shot calling and strategy, because one team was beating them with worse players but better shot calling and strategy over and over every game. Teams have upgraded skill so that now they can also beat Cloud9 in terms of skill and be ahead of certain players there and catch up to a TSM also, who were one of the top teams who were outskilling people. You can see how this has directly affected it. If Cloud9 hadn't have dominated so hard, teams like Curse and Dignitas could have kept their teams from last split. Those were good enough teams to battle for third and fourth place and maybe believe we have one good result, we could maybe make it. But now in this world, you know you can't, so you have no option anymore. You're actually forced to improve in very specific ways. Like, essentially, Cloud9 have shown you a map of what you have to do if you ever want to beat them. You couldn't do it before, so now you get the personnel that potentially could do it. The reason why I bring this example up is because this is why the criticisms we gave of Cloud9 before never fully applied. Like, even though I said, okay, at Worlds, I can't see them finishing top 4 because of the fact that unless they get some insanely easy round of 8 draw, they're going to face teams who just have as good strategy or too much skill. Just too much. Like, you're just going to get beaten. But before, I could still understand, okay, listen, keep dominating NA, why change that? And maybe have a chance at doing well. Now, if it gets to a world where next split it's not even for certain you'll finish top 3, and then you go to Worlds now and you don't do well, now you're actually in a world where this will eventually force Cloud9 to make a change.
Yeah, they are going to have to make a change if they can't really get it together this season. I think that's going to be the ultimate end of that. And I think you could say the same thing probably about Fnatic as well.
No, in Fnatic, what's funny is it's the other way around, where their change they're going to have to make is they've got all the skill and they can't... Okay, Cloud9 still has the shot calling and the decision making, so you don't want to remove anyone for that reason, okay? You want to keep them, even if the players are weaker, you want to keep them for that reason.
Do they? Maybe, I think if it's Fnatic, maybe like Cyanide might be on the chopping block.
Okay,
but we'll see.
Well, or he obviously gets exposed when Expeke is doing bad. We've seen that historically. But I mean, the other players, if you have to remove one of the other players, which they might have to do, like, I get the sense, by the way, that actually they'll get out of it. Because what will happen is they'll do that thing where you're losing, and so you create a scenario where you essentially coerce someone into retiring, and because they retire, it's all happy families. He's going to step back, and we're going to bring in this new player, and there's no problems whatsoever with the fan base, you know. That's what I think will actually happen. And so as a result, it'll take care of itself. So I'm going to say one of those players, probably a solo laner, will just decide to conveniently sail off into the horizon. They'll bring in a new player, and there'll be no problem whatsoever. But I mean, with them, it's the opposite. They've gotten by on the fact in the past, well, how can we replace any of these players? They're all so good. Well, eventually, then, if you don't do well, you're going to have to replace someone in Fnatic to fix the shot calling issues. That's going to have to be fixed, or the team play issues, or there's some synergy problem here. So eventually, for the other reason, you're going to have to replace someone in Fnatic. But for the same thing, metagame issues. Remember, it's the same scenario. Cloud9 could beat everyone with the superior shot calling and team play before. Now, that alone isn't enough necessarily to be ahead that much. Maybe ahead a bit. Well, the same sense, Fnatic could always know that because our team is so good skill-wise, we can always bring it around. Anytime we turn it around, the team, we've got the toolkit there to always be the best. I don't think that's the case anymore. Especially in a world where even teams like Millennium can be quite good skill-wise. Now that advantage you had has shrunk loads. And so it's always hardest to build on your strength. Usually you're better off trying to shore up your weakness. That's the better way to improve.
Well, but also Fnatic did get RNA as a coach now as well, so they are trying to shore up some of the infrastructure and perhaps the weaknesses that they had in terms of discipline and strategy and picks. And so we'll see if that works for them as well. I mean, I think I like him very much as a person. I share similar concerns to what I shared with Loco Doco, is that he's very passionate, but hasn't had a good long career on any kind of one organization. He's like bounced around a lot, and he's maybe a little bit too close in age and friendship
Friendly?
with the players.
Yeah, I think that's an issue.
It is an issue. It is an issue. But we'll see. We'll see.
Like, that's actually one thing I do worry about. I've made this I don't know if I've done it on the show before, but someone once gave me a great example as to why, if you're someone's boss or in any position of authority, you can never be equal with them in terms of how you relate to them as a person. Because if you relate to them as a person on an equal level, then when you then use your authority, which is your authority, it's within your realm to exert authority over them, it won't seem justified and it will seem really out of order. Because wait a minute, we were friends a minute ago and we were just joking around, and now you're telling me like that's out of order for me to do this. If we're friends, then the first thing I'll probably do if I'm like hurt by your suggestion is I'll then do that to you. I'll be like, oh, well, I've done something wrong. Well, I thought you did this wrong last time. Well, I don't have the authority to do that. In this particular case, the coach is giving the advice to the player. The players aren't supposed to then tell the coach, like, no, well, I think you did this wrong last week and that wrong. Because the idea is we're going to keep following this guy's lead, and if he's wrong, he gets fired by their bosses above him. The idea is there's supposed to be a system here that goes down, trickles down. It doesn't ever go back up the other way. And so the reason why that's a problem is, say my boss is really friendly with me and we hang out and we mess around and we like drink a lot and we do drugs and we talk about girls and all this sort of stuff. If I then fuck up, my boss he has to choose in that moment, is he my friend or is he my boss? If he's my friend, his actual response should be like, yeah, I know you fucked up, but like, fuck it, you get paid, like you finish the end of the day, let's meet after work and we'll have a drink, okay? If he's my boss, he has to be like, that's totally unacceptable, you can't fuck around on company time, like it's my responsibility that you're doing, but you see, you can't have that closeness. That is actually something where I think there probably should be separation between analysts and coaches. Like I've actually seen in the past, that's why I've always stressed on this show, the difference between coach and analyst. Because, okay, remember the examples of Alex Penn as the analyst of Cloud9 and then the analyst of Coast. In Cloud9, it's hard to know how much he actually did as an analyst because they're almost identically good when he wasn't on the team and when he was on the team. So I could believe he did something, but he didn't do something so integral like a coach where he was really shaping their play. He was doing something, but he wasn't like a moving prime mover as to why they were going in a direction. And I don't think he could be in that scenario because I got the sense that he lived in the house with them, he was friends with the players, he seemed to be on that sort of a level with them where he was an equal. He was like just another member of the team in that sense, doing his part. And so actually that sort of a person would probably make a really bad coach because there's no authority position there to be from. Don't you think as a coach there has to be a separation there?
I think absolutely, and I feel very strongly about that myself. I'm not when I interact with CLG, I don't like put myself in a friend situation with them because, I'm not there to be their friends. I'm there to be an authority figure and to help the team. And frankly, I can't be friends with them because it's my job if somebody's underperforming to, get a new player, basically. So it's a different situation, and I don't like going getting drinks or hanging out with the players in social situations. You have to maintain a distance.
I've also thought as well, like that's actually one of the biggest problems that has plagued Western League of Legends. It wasn't just that everyone bought into that cynical thing of like, let's keep Scara, let's keep the odd one, let's keep Hotshot GG just because they're famous names and the streaming numbers. That is a factor, but it's not the primary factor. Believe it or not, I would believe the primary reason why Scara and the Odd One took so long to be removed was that everyone on the team liked them and wanted to play with them and hoped maybe they can turn it around. Like, I like this guy so much, I'll give him leeway that maybe he could turn it around. Maybe he has a good game and I believe it could turn. The difference is, if that had been a brand new player for that split who'd played at the same level, they would have immediately, at the end of the split, if they weren't friends with them, been like, we have to get rid of this guy. Like, we can't play with that guy again this split. But they were letting the emotional aspect override that, which is really bad in any sort of business or sports type decision. Because you have to have a scenario. Listen, you even have to go as far with it where I could be friends. Let's say I'm friends with Scara and I'm in Dignitas. Let's say I'm a cutie pie and I'm friends with Scara. Let's say Scara wasn't even playing bad. He was playing average, but then we get the chance to get Shifter. Even if he's playing average, if I'm friends with him, then I'm going to say, well, he's not playing bad, so let's not cut him. But no, I have to realize that even if he was playing average, I now have a chance to upgrade. So even if he's my friend, I have to upgrade because that's my career. This is the financial and business aspect. I have to actually, even if he's not doing badly, cut him because I have a better player available. That's not betrayal or like lack of loyalty. These are all like weird implications that fans add in that shouldn't have any place in the business world or in the team world, right?
Well, and they seem to, for some whatever reason, in esports, because of the streaming and the personalized nature, fans seem to be a lot more emotionally attached to players than those in traditional sports. That's just a weird observation, but because of the very like personal interaction with the community, the bond tends to be stronger. Also, I think the audience tends to be younger. So,
okay, before we leave EU, let's just talk then about this Gambit issue. Or, as I like to call it, why Riot is a secret adjunct of the CIA continuing the Cold War 30 years later against all Russian people using LCS as their primary weapon of the Iron Curtain.
Well, it wasn't just Gambit; it was NIP too.
That's
right?
why I say it, because
they got screwed. Yeah, it's just really disappointing. And Riot's answer is not in any way satisfactory or professional when it comes to running a sports league.
Monty, let's roleplay this here. I'll do it like this, okay?
I love this.
I'll be the fan, okay? Who's just asking you a question, like. But Monty, Riot gives us so much. They organised a wonderful event at Wembley, this big stadium, and we want LCS to be bigger and esports to grow. So isn't it worth giving up NIP having that player and giving up Gambit having their players so we can go to this awesome venue and book out like a huge stadium? Isn't that worth it?
Why are these two things mutually exclusive? Why can't you have the Wembley Stadium and just postpone 2 games and fill them with Earth mode or other show matches or like an all-star game where fans can vote on players? Like, there's no reason why these Gambit games have to happen this weekend. There's none.
Oh, here's one of my favorites as well. But maybe the Gambit players didn't plan in advance 1 year and apply for visas so that it's if anything happened to them, it's their fault.
My favorite thing about this is I don't think fans understand the amount of bravery that it must have taken from the Gambit staff to stand up to Riot in as aggressive of a manner as they did. Because at the end of the day, Riot is writing Gambit checks for hundreds of thousands of dollars that is keeping this organization, or at least helping keep them afloat. And to challenge them so publicly is what can only be described as a super aggressive move in the world of esports. And so for Gambit to come out, say, this is what was wrong, this is what happened, this is where Riot just fell on its ass, is, I think it shouldn't be taken lightly.
No, that's commendable.
It should not be taken lightly. It's very commendable from Gambit that they managed to stand up in this situation. And Riot also gave a horrible response to all of this, where they didn't even address all of the points that Gambit made, such as Gambit was saying that they had a choice basically to miss the Cologne matches because they would have to stay in Russia while their passports were held, or go to the LCS, so there was essentially nothing they could do after the season had started. Riot didn't even address that. They just said, we attempted to help Gambit Gaming acquire emergency visas. It's like, yeah, but Gambit said why that wasn't possible. So why didn't you just postpone the matches? And they also made some BS about, oh, well, they couldn't play the matches remotely because of vague security issues. Okay, maybe that's true. Maybe they couldn't play the matches from the Clone Studio. Postpone the matches. Postpone them. Put one match on Thursday next week, one match on Friday, or maybe you split it over 2 weeks. Or maybe you don't do it next week. Maybe you do it the week after that to give them time. Like, there's no reason. And what is so, I made a tweet about this, which was obviously, I only did this Twitter, you can't express yourself all the way. It's a slippery slope argument where I said, when you start to value competitive integrity or like showmanship over competitive integrity, at what point does it change from like the NFL or FIFA into WWE, like entertainment wrestling, right? Because what Riot did was they said, this is the you look nakedly at Riot's priorities right here, which is we want to move this esports event to London. We want to have this big spectacle, the hoo-ha, and we're going to get all these eyes watching. Brr, yay! And that's cool, Riot. I agree. That's fucking cool. It's cool to go to London. It's great to have all these other venues. But it is never acceptable at the price of competitive integrity. And what you did was you sacrificed competitive integrity on the altar of showmanship, and that is what the WWE is. Maybe not to the extreme that Riot just did it, but that is the road on which the WWE walks, and that is the road on which no sport will ever walk if it wants to be taken seriously in terms of competitive integrity, in terms of equal opportunity for a team to win the league. It is total and utter bullshit, and it is so embarrassing for Riot. Like, I get so worked up about this because I love the competitive aspect of this game. And I don't care if this game is played in an isolated room or a studio like it used to be with no audience, as long as the competitive integrity is maintained. Would I rather have an awesome audience? Would I rather have an awesome venue? Of course. But it will never be first priority. Ever.
That's also a scenario as well where, like, to put in context what you said about like how brave Gambit were to do it, I'll give you another example of something that's happened in esports right now, which shows the way it would normally go. So the other day, doing research for an interview, I watched an appearance of Broken Shard on a community talk show in esports called Unfiltered. And he came on this talk show to talk about his visa situation, where he can't stay in LCSNA, he's had to be replaced in his team. And essentially, in that scenario, he has all the room in the world to just dummy on Riot 24/7 and be like, they promised visas for all the people coming over, and they bragged about how they had these special athlete visas and it'd all be figured out, and they had a special lawyer and all that. He had all the room in the world where he could have said that. He purposely went out of his way over and over to keep saying, but I don't think it's Riot's fault that I didn't get in, you know. I think it was just like an unfortunate scenario with the custom. He kept trying to constantly shift the blame from Riot, even though clearly some of the blame lies on Riot if we accept their premise that they've gotten these wonderful visas that didn't exist and they've got a special exemption, which apparently doesn't seem to be true. So the point here is, in his case, he's trying to do that because he's thinking, well, if I ever want to be involved with LCS again and be on another team, what do I gain from sort of like throwing Riot under the bus? So I'll purposely not do it. But Riot themselves are never going to come out and openly... Here's the key point, Monty. They never apologize for things that they've clearly done wrong or mistakes they've made. If they did apologize, by the way, most people... If they just said, you know what, we messed up, like we should have applied 8 weeks in advance, we applied 4 weeks in advance or whatever it was, sorry about that Gambit, like we'll never let this happen again. I think most people...
Say that. They did say that.
To a degree, but they didn't... The way they said it, I don't believe it'll change next time. They didn't make it clear in that sense, you know.
I was actually pleasantly surprised that Riot actually made a public statement where they admitted blame for that. So, I mean, I don't think you can really nail them for that one, but it's still inexcusable.
But this isn't the first time this has happened with Gambit, Monty. Here's another point I want to ask you about.
I know.
How can we... Right, the most bullshit opinion on Reddit goes like this. Well, the Gambit players should expect that. You know, Russia isn't in like that part of the European Union, so they have a harder time, therefore it's all on them. No, I'm sorry, if you're going to have a league which allows Russian people to compete, you must provide special consideration for those Russian people to getting them into the league. You don't just say, oh, you don't have the same circumstances, well, that's your fault. Don't compete then, go home. That's a totally exclusionary proposition. If they're allowed to compete, then you must help them with extra help, right? It's like a disabled person. Okay, a disabled person can't get up the stairs. You don't just say, well, crawl up, motherfucker. No, you put a ramp for them. That costs more money and the normal person doesn't need it, but that's what you do.
And the difference with Broken Shard and Dexter and Bjergsen and all of these other scenarios where there have been people who have missed certain days or weeks or unfortunately not been able to compete is that you go into the LCS as a team knowing that you're going to have to get this person a visa, and maybe it's going to be in the middle of the season. You know what I'm talking about? Like, you go into the league knowing that. And you as a team, CLG made a choice. We're going to get Dexter. We knew that, you know, we didn't expect him to, like, go to jail and have all these problems, but we knew that we were going to have to wait for a few weeks, and we were going to have subs, and that was our choice, right? That was on us. That's our choice as a team, right? That is our sacrifice to our ability to compete in the league. The difference with Gambit is that Gambit made a choice with a roster, entered the roster, and then was randomly told after the season had started that they were going to be in an impossible situation to compete by the league itself. That is what is unacceptable. If a team makes a choice, that's fine. That's on them, right? But if the league, the competitive body, the allegedly neutral competitive body is screwing its own teams, that's when the problem really arises.
I have another general Riot point that has to be raised on this topic. If you notice, the way I purposely framed my last point was in the context of what Riot themselves tell you about themselves. So listen, if you tell me that a player from Israel might have problems getting into the US to essentially not work, but sort of work and try and, something, I'll tell you right now, from what I know about US customs and immigration, that's going to be very difficult. That's going to be hit and miss. So one of you will get in, the other one won't, maybe for the same reason on either side, and it won't make sense, and there's a lot of bureaucracy involved there, and some of it's hit or miss as to what lawyer you have, okay? I'll tell you, there's a chance it'll fail. But if you've told me beforehand, you've had a huge party, I've just gotten new visas for everyone where we will all be treated like, when David Beckham came here as an athlete, that's what it'll be treated like for Brokenshard when he comes. And there'll be no problems, and you'll all get in fine, and that's it. If you've told me that, then I have to judge you on a different criteria there. I have to judge you versus that, unless I'm calling you a liar. Now, if I accept your premise, if you then fail miserably, and it in fact looks like nothing's actually changed, and they're going on the same visa scenario that we had before you made your big fanfare, then there's something that can be criticized there, either the fanfare or your process. In the same scenario, okay, with this thing of Gambit going to London, every single interview with Riot goes along the lines of like, we love esports, esports is only going to get bigger, we believe this league and Riot and League of Legends can help make esports get bigger, and it's going to be a bright future for everyone. Okay, if it's such a bright future for League of Legends, here's a crazy idea. Maybe we could have it announced, let's say 12 weeks in advance, that you're going to London on this date, and if you're from another country and you need a visa, apply now 12 weeks in advance, so there's plenty of time. Why do we live in a world where no one knows the details of Season 4 World Championship, which is 2 months away or something, or 3 months away? Why do we live in a world where Season 5 is not announced yet? Why do we live in a world where we don't know what countries people will be going to for the next split of LCS? These are all things where if you truly have this long-term plan and you believe in it, a year in advance isn't much to ask. I'm not asking you to book out a stadium 10 years in advance and hope League of Legends is alive then. I'm saying a year from now. Are you telling me you don't believe League of Legends will be an esport in 1 year from now and be in Europe, and that you can go to this stadium that you're going to book in Spain? Let's say you're going to book the Barcelona stadium for football in Spain. What, you think the game will have died by then? Well, in that case, you don't agree with your own propaganda. It has to be one or the other. Either you're lying or you're incompetent.
Well, not only that, but you have to remember that Gambit was allegedly, according to Gambit, not even told about this until the public announcement. And to not tell the teams what exactly is going on and where they're going to be playing, and not only that, but not even looking into a possible visa conflict in a complicated country like Europe, or a complicated continent like Europe, with so many different countries and so many different international agreements, it is frankly bizarre, and I think shows a severe lack of foresight and even to a certain degree management problems with Riot.
I've got 2 more points for you on this, Monty. You'll like this one. So they can't reschedule the games because, I'm sorry, we've already announced those games are going to happen on this week.
I still have no idea.
I seem to remember Riot playing God with the rule book on that rematch that a Gambit, just Gambit again, happened to have to play. They turned up one day and found out, by the way, today you're playing that whole game again. Oh, it's weird. You can just shift games, shift schedules. When it suits you, you can do that anytime you want. You've just ruined the integrity of your own rules when you do that. If you're going to play God once, just do it again.
Not to mention they moved matches for IEM previously as well.
Right, well, the last 2 topics we'll do then will be about, one will be about Korea, and then we'll do the buff timer thing. So we don't have that much to do in Korea because there hasn't really been that much, but I had this one thing I wanted to talk about, which was that the casters for OGN created a tier list that they made, and I'll tell everyone what the tiers essentially were. Tier 1, the best tier, was the 2 Samsung teams, obviously, and then here's the key thing: 3rd team, SK Telecom K. They're the 3 teams in Tier 1. Tier 2 was like everyone under the sun. I'm not even joking. Like Blaze, Shield. You're thinking, yeah? Okay,
it was everybody except for IM1, IM2, and MKZ.
Yeah. So the point is, essentially, they're saying.
And then tier 3 was IM1, IM2, and MKZ.
They've made a tier in which Blaze and Shield are at the same tier level as Falcons, as
Big File Miracle,
SK Telecom S, all these teams, okay? Now the problem with that is, we won't go too far into this, but obviously Falcons did take a game off Shield, so people are going to be like, oh, see, they are in the same tier. Like, no, that doesn't work at all, I'm afraid. That's not how tiers work. But secondly, as a point, isn't this almost like an exercise in futility? Because it's like either don't make any tiers, or make tiers and do them properly. Like, what was happening? Did they only have 5 minutes before they had to rush out of the room, and so they didn't have time?
I don't know, dude.
If you're going to create tiers,
so
why not
weird.
make 5 tiers and then actually make them accurate, you know? Because that second tier tells me nothing at all. It's like it's almost the antithesis of the point of making a tier list, that second tier with every team in.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think it's an extremely strange situation that they put themselves in, and I don't agree with their conclusions or their assumptions whatsoever. I think that it's much easier to. I don't even know. I don't even know, man. I don't even know what they were thinking. I think it's really weird.
What did you actually think of the fact that Falcons beat Shield in that one game?
I don't know what to think about Shield right now. I think that there's been a lot of inconsistency. It's not only that the Falcons beat Shield, it's that S beat White, like Samsung White, which is the team formerly known as Samsung Ozone. I don't find the Stealths Arrows 1-1 that unreasonable, because the Stealths are actually a pretty consistent mid-tier team, and the Arrows are like this wildly consistent either top or bottom tier team. But the S taking game off White, and especially the Falcons taking game off Shield, was really weird. That shows, I think, some big problems in Najin Shield. Maybe they haven't been using the offseason to the best degree possible. I think that, yeah, especially because the Falcons have so many new players on their roster and the Falcons looked really shaky in the qualifiers as well. I think that's a bad sign for Najin White Shield, and maybe the start of a slump for them.
Yeah, that was the sad thing I thought about that game. I watched it hoping that I was going to see incredible play by the Falcons, like amazing outplays, and maybe these would be new rising stars. They just played okay. Shield played very strange. Like, one of the weirdest things is, think about the comp they had. It's actually a comp that they tried to run in the finals, I think. They had like Twitch, they had LeBlanc, they had Rise. Now, they were at the midpoint of the game, no, not midpoint, at like the 38-minute mark or something. The kills and the gold and the towers were almost the same. I think Falcons had like maybe 2 towers up, but otherwise the gold was almost the same, the kills were almost the same. This is Shield. They're supposed to know to wait 5 or 10 minutes at that point. Rise was already in like God mode, you know, like where you couldn't be stopped. And then they just win that game late game. Instead, they like purposely took a bunch of team fights and lost them.
Yeah, and especially, yeah, of course,
that was like Shield not playing
too.
Shield, you know.
Shield knows how to play the late game. They're the team that comes back from big deficits and crushes you at 45 minutes, right? They're the team that, you know, wins with minions, right? It's just a really strange. I think they vastly underestimated the Falcons and tried to rush something that in previous seasons, like, I think they've gotten too cocky. Last season they were a little bit more reserved. When they were behind, they had to play like everything out very technically in order to get back into the game. And now they're just, I think, trying to force their hand, and they're not used to playing that way. And not only that, but I think it's just a sign of cockiness.
Another thing that was weird to me was it's yet another game where Zephyr plays Twitch and like literally is invisible. I guess he just has that ability on permanently, Monty. He's just in ambush mode all the time. Like, that guy just never learns.
No, I don't think Zephyr is the best Twitch player. Just like I don't think Dept is the best Twitch player. I think Piglet and Imp are really the really good. And OQ, too, the new guy on Sword, is a really good Twitch player.
I think Twitch is the most overrated OP champion I've seen in the last year or so, because he's the one where people keep picking him thinking they've got some OP pick who aren't good on the champion, and then they do nothing on it. Like, there's a very specific thing you want to do with that champion that if you can't do it, it's almost a waste of time having him.
Yeah, you have to create picks with him. You have to play very aggressively with him. You can't just farm a lane. It doesn't work like that.
Well, especially think about how ridiculous it is when people who aren't very good on Twitch keep picking Twitch against Cogmore, against good Cogmore players, and then wondering why they lose. Like, well, what do you expect?
Yeah, if you don't play aggressively, the Cogmore will rock you, basically. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I don't think there's been enough games in Korea yet to really say a whole lot about what's going on there. Like, we just kind of completed, one match through all the groups, a couple matches in one, but there's kind of like insufficient data size because we haven't even seen one team play twice yet. So it's a little bit hard to say. I think White is maybe in a bit of a slump right now as well. The loss to S is truly surprising for White, even though they did lose to them in Masters. I don't know what's going on in that team, but I have a feeling that it's like a lot of internal issues at the moment, maybe personality conflicts or something like that, because their inconsistency is just wacky. And it shouldn't be that way with how loaded of the talent they are. Meanwhile, Blue continues to keep rolling. SKTK looked pretty good. The KT Bullets, of course, the team that will forever break my heart. And I'm done with them. I'm over it. I'm breaking up with the KT Bullets. Thorin, I've decided.
Okay. Listen, Ozone. Well, White, I guess.
They're too mercurial. I'm tired of all their changing moods. My poor heart can't take the KT Bullets anymore.
The problem is the White team is so loaded with talent that's played together for long enough that like it still feels certain that they'll somehow qualify for Worlds. But I could see a world in which, first of all, if they don't qualify for Worlds, I'm almost certain minimum one player, if not two player on that team retires. Just outright retires,
probably.
is done. And I could even see them being the sort of team where they qualify for Worlds, and then if they don't make a deep run, again, one or two players just says, right, I'm done now. Like, they're the sort of team where I think it's like, they really have to like go do super well this season, or then just not going to keep it going. Because the thing is, when you win, you will at least say, yeah, I'll see what happens next season. Like, at least I'll try again next and see if I can win again, you know. But if you're not winning and it's bad, you're just going to give it up, aren't you?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the success of that team, and I've heard rumblings from the Korean community that's true too. I'm not going to like perpetuate rumors, but I have heard some people have told me that certain members on what was formerly Ozone, what is now White, would be considering retirement should they not perform well at Worlds this year. But from what I understand, they're all on board with practicing hard and getting to Worlds and putting up that good showing. So we'll see. We only have a couple games to go off of, but it was disappointing. I think their first result was definitely disappointing. And, that group, which we thought White would easily make it out of, Frost is also in that group. That's a dangerous group to be in right now, especially considering Frost has been improving as well. And if S is capable of beating White, so is Frost.
Don't you find it incredibly disappointing, all the teasing about what might happen with Blaze and Frost, the moves that they make, and then the sum total of it all was we've taken Lost Boy out and replaced him with a potentially worse player. That is the end of our moves. We are the CG organization. Please do not question us. How can that be, Monty?
I was hoping that Prey would have, found himself again, and that we could finally have the Prey Mad Life lane that we always deserved so richly, but it is not to be.
I mean, the most bizarre thing about this move is that essentially they've shown no intention of improving either team. And yet what's bizarre is you would think the reason why the Mad Life to Blaze move made sense is because just in terms of the points, etc., you probably want to now do it where both teams aren't going to qualify. So now it's time to pick which of the teams, Najin style, which team can make it. Well, obviously Blaze is the best chance, so let's load everything on the Blaze, forget about Frost, because who knows, maybe Shy retires, maybe Mad Life, who knows at the end of the season. So instead, we need to try and get one team to Worlds. Let's load everything on the Blaze, make them our team, they're our horse, and then we'll worry about what we do with Frost later. Instead, they've done the same thing they've done the last 3 seasons, which is continue to split talent among the two teams and make two decidedly average top teams that can lose to every top team, beat every bad team, and finish 4th and 5th, which is exactly where you don't want to be in the Worlds qualification.
It's pretty terrible. Yeah, it would have been nice if Lust Boy was going to leave the team, that you would have just put Bad Life there with Emperor and like actually, put all your money down on that one pony. It's sad.
Especially because think about this.
And frankly, maybe you put Coco in instead of Ambition too.
That was another move. Yeah, exactly. Here's the key thing about those moves as well, is that those moves would also actually, they would indirectly tell you what your next move is as well. So let's say you put Mad Life onto Blaze, and Emperor doesn't then become one of the top 2 or 3 AD carries. like consistently and really establish himself. Well, at that point, you've given him all the chances you can give. He's probably not going to go much beyond that. But he can always make the claim now, like, oh, I had Lost Boy, who's at the end of his career, now I have Gonzo, sort of adapting. So now he can always have that wiggle room of like, well, how good is he supposed to be? You never get to see his potential, you know. Same as if you put Coco onto Blaze now. Well, now you really know, is the way forwards to make it so that Flame doesn't be the hard carry? Because if we have Coco here and he can potentially be a carry, well, now we get to see, like, how should the team function? The good thing about lots of these moves is they take away excuses and, like, too much vagueness that at the moment exists on both Frost and Blaze, where some players are, like, old school players you hope get better, and some are young players who you hope get better, and there's always, like, different factors as to why you never fully judge each harshly, you know?
Well, it's also just sad because, you know, it seems like the CJ organization themselves do not want the answers. They're, like, afraid of the answers to these questions.
Well, because I think the key point I made there is that I think they're not as worried about the young players, but they're really worried about finding out that some of those established names like Ambition, like Mad Life, like Shy, they don't want to have to get that realization that actually we shouldn't have this guy in the team anymore. They want under all, like they're going into a scenario like, listen, we honestly want to get better, asterisks, only in a world where Mad Life, Shy, Ambition are all definitely on our teams. Like, we can't think outside of that paradigm because that will be too shattering for us, you know. Because if we lose them with all our mistakes in recruitment, what have we got at that point? Like, think of a world where Frost doesn't have Mad Life. You're going to lose a lot of your fans there.
Yeah.
And odds are you're not going to replace him instantly and become the best against you. You can't get your fans back by winning, you know.
Yeah, and that's especially scary because if you've been to Korea, anybody who's been to a bunch of Champions games at Korea knows that Mad Life is like the most popular player and knows that Frost is probably the most popular team, although maybe SKTK is like surpassing them now. But for most of my time in the last
just
2
look at
years,
All-Stars. They still voted fucking Shy and Mad Life in. Meanwhile, Shy isn't even the best in his organization at that position. That's how popular those players are. Even one of the people who all the fangirls think is the best looking didn't even get voted in. He had an army of fangirls, and Shy still got voted in. That's how popular those guys are.
Yeah, that's pretty funny.
Okay, the last topic to discuss then, as a good way to go out, is this thing of that Riot apparently might introduce these buff timers. And just so that there's context for people who haven't read, okay, it's not a buff timer like when you watch LCS, where it shows like the dragon is going to come up in 1 minute on the screen. It's not like it's not literally that bad that like now like Dignitas see like, oh, Baron's up in 2 minutes, like we don't need to ward that anymore. Like you have to have had vision of the buff, of your enemy's buff while he was taking it, and you only see it on the scoreboard when you have it, and you have to look up in the same way as, in theory, everyone can check every item their opponent has, but most people don't always do it if they're bad players. But it's still, the core point we're obviously going to make now, is that it removes an element of skill that someone could have an advantage over you that they now won't have, right?
Right, and I don't particularly mind this for Dragon or Baron, which you can see, but for enemy buffs and stuff like that, where you're coordinating invades, I don't know. I mean, I don't like this at all. I don't like this at all, frankly. People are like, well, and the reason why I don't find it problematic with Dragon and Baron as opposed to enemy buffs is that Dragon and Baron are put in chat anyway, already put in chat, and maybe you should remove that. That's a valid argument. But when you kill them, they're put in chat. If you have vision, it's time-stamped, it's there. All you have to do is add 6 or 7 to that number to get the Dragon or Baron timers. Okay, maybe you can make an argument for that. But buffs, these are things that are not put in chat right now, and that is like all on the player in order to get the timers. And if you haven't played the professional game of League of Legends, there are so many times Riot says in their post, we don't like bookkeeping. Well, like, so much of the professional game is bookkeeping ult timers, summoner timers, everything like that in the chat, just like the jungle timers. So it's not actually removing like that much bookkeeping. And so I just wonder how far this is going to go. And I also really hate Riot's explanation of this because like if you actually read it, they talk about clarity, but if you actually look specifically at the language that they use to discuss the difference between why jungle timers are okay, yet why summoner and ultimate timers are not okay? Because frankly, if your thing is, well, I have to be able to see that, well, you see perhaps a flash being used. We'll get into this in a second because their argument actually doesn't really hold water. But So I'm going to read part of this article right now, which is, it says, on one side, a case could be made that map-level objective awareness is a significant aspect of skill, and to that we wholeheartedly agree. We would not, for example, alert you when an opponent entered your immediate radius from fog, nor would we ever track enemy cooldowns for you. Your interactions with your opponents are sacred, and we will always leave those interactions alone. This doesn't tell me anything about why these interactions are sacred. So in the Church of Riot, Riot descends down from heaven, and they said, oh, jungle timers, these are not holy, but the interactions with your opponent, that is part of a jungle timer with their buffs, but these interactions with your opponent, when they enter your vision radius or your enemy cooldowns, these are sacred. What the hell does that even mean? Like, how do you divide between the sacred and the profane in terms of this game? And it doesn't give me any information about their logic behind creating these actions. Because
they also didn't justify why it's sacred, and why
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, what is sacred here? You're using religious terminology for this?
I like that, dude.
What the hell? Right? Yeah. It's like almost appropriate.
Well, no, the genius of that is
dogma that has no reason or backing.
It's arbitrary. It's an arbitrary ruling of God. He just says, listen, don't eat pork on Sundays or I kill you. You should be killed. But why? What's wrong with pork? Did you hear me? Now, chicken is sacred, though. You can have that any day of the week. What about the pork, though? Yeah, but the chicken.
Nice paragraph. On the other side, and here's what finally changed our minds, the jungle is a constant environment. Unlike champions, monsters will always be where you expect them to be. Unlike cooldowns, there is no variability in respawn rates. With timestamps available in the team chat windows, timing of jungle monsters often comes down to whoever types it out. We don't want to beat around the bush here. The emergence of third-party applications put fuel on the fire, but they only increased our confidence. So blah, blah, blah. Okay. Well, first off, you're timing blue and red buff, which aren't in chat right now. These are things that are not currently in there. So you're just talking about, you need to differentiate between Dragon and Baron, which I can sort of understand because they're already in the chat, versus enemy red buff, which requires you to type it out and live in that world and actually take the timer. And also, they say, there is no, unlike cooldowns, there is no variability in respawn rates. Okay, technically you're correct in terms of summoner spells most of the time. That's not true, however, because most people don't run Distortion Enchantment or run deep into the utility tree in order to reduce summoner spell cooldown. So for the most part, a flash is a flash is a flash. It doesn't have a variability of a cooldown timer, except in rare circumstances. Certainly not something that you see every game. So not like ults maybe don't fall into this category. They're affected by cooldown reduction, and there's a million different timers, blah, 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 blah. But it's like, I don't really understand the differentiation or why it's okay for them to stretch timers that aren't being taken. Baron and Dragon, I'm okay with, but to stretch it into buffs and then like have just decree that things are sacred and then say at the same time, well, you know, these changed, but these don't, even though some of them don't really change in terms of summoner timers. It just doesn't make any sense. There's no internal consistency or logic to this whatsoever, and it all just gets kind of swept under the rug, and nobody's asking the right questions.
Well, what I love is what you said about the line about, you think what they're going to address is, here's why we did this. This is exactly what we did, and here's why we did it. Instead, what they say is, we wouldn't do this, something totally different. Like, okay, what's the relevance of that, though? What is that? You haven't explained why you did. No, but I wouldn't do that, though. Like, well, yeah, but that does not connect. Like, there's a joke, okay, where in marketing years ago, there was a guy, some genius guy, who figured out that, you know, when you're going to buy like 2 different food products, and you know it'll always say on the box, like nowadays people are really health conscious, so maybe it says like 20% reduced fat. Well, if you're choosing between 2 brands that are almost the same, and one says 20% reduced fat, if you care about your health, you might think to yourself, well, I didn't really care which of these I got, so I'll get that one since it sounds like it's got a feature that's better. That sounds like a feature, okay. Well, there's a person, and this apparently really happened, where there was certain like food types where they would put stuff on it. When there was this like asbestos scare where asbestos was in walls used as like insulation, but it turned out it like killed you if it got in your lungs and like fucked you up and gave you emphysema and stuff. They actually would put on like certain food products or something like that, like does not contain any asbestos. And of course, whatever food product that was never contained asbestos. That's like saying it doesn't contain radioactive material or something. Like, well, obviously it doesn't. But if you, same scenario, if you're in that situation where someone's choosing between the two, then obviously you're almost implying that the other one does contain it. So I'm going to be like, well, I don't really want radioactive material in my breakfast cereal, so I guess I'll choose the other one. That's like sort of what Riot's done here. They're like, we've made this really drastic change that's going to reduce some of the skill in the game. And everyone's like, oh no, that's really bad. But we definitely won't make it so that you only have one ability per champion, though. We wouldn't do that. Like, and then people are like, Riot, you're the best. You'll always keep all the champion abilities. Like, what? How could anyone accept that exalt? Like, here's the other thing, Monty. People aren't going to like this, okay? I don't come from League of Legends. I come from other games. Quake, Brood War. These are incredibly hard games where actually one of the difficult things about the game is multitasking. Because what makes multitasking a brilliant feature for a game is that a human brain can't multitask. Human brains actually just have to like move between serial tasks, like do this now, stop, now do this, now stop, do this, now stop. And what you do is you train yourself to do a hybrid of multitasking where you just remember to do the other things in a different order. You can't do them all at the same time though. You can't be thinking about this while you're doing that. You just remember that at some point I have to stop thinking about this and then change my thinking to this and then change it back quickly. And that dance is what being a pro player at a really hard game is all about. Now here's a shocking statement for people who play League of Legends. League of Legends is not a hard game in that context. Compared to Brood War, where you have to micro units and move your army and build your army and look what the opponent's doing and figure out your move 10 minutes from now, all at the same time, but obviously not really in that hybrid mode I'm talking about. That's incredibly hard to the extent that it is impossible to play a perfect game of Brood War because of that. Like even the best player ever maybe played like 85% of what you could ever do in that game, and it will never be capped out. Same in Quake. You have to time the armor, you have to know where he is, you have to know what weapons he has, you have to know what weapons you have, you have to do calculations on who's going to win this fight, what's my escape route. These are incredibly hard games. Now here's the problem. League of Legends isn't even up to their level. I'd say as an individual game it's maybe like 30% of that. Yeah, there's a team aspect that adds in a bit more skill, but over, in the terms of the individual stuff, it's maybe 30% of those games, and that might be being generous. Now you're going to take even more individual skill from the jungler and even give him less things to think about and give him a free pass where if he just happens to run through a brush while someone picks up a buff, he gets a free timing on when that comes up 2 minutes later or whatever, and like, that's insane.
And the best part is he may not even notice. He may not even notice.
No, that's my point. You can accidentally get the information.
Like accidental information collection. Like it's just it's not a good choice.
I mean, you're literally removing a feature from the game.
Yeah.
You're not changing something for the better or for a reason. You're removing a feature that can differentiate. And like the reason why I make that point about skill is it's already hard enough to differentiate yourself. Like, believe it or not, in other games, we look at League of Legends and we're like, wow, Koreans must be God. Because in League of Legends, there's not even that much individual skill disparity, and they're still that much ahead, and they're by far the best teams. So that shows how incredible they are. Now it's like you've taken another aspect away. And by the way, I'm not going to get into a conspiracy theory that this is to like help Western teams compete with Koreans. Like, it's not that big a difference. But I will say this. I've made this point a million times before in all games whenever they seem to get dumbed down a bit. If you really did this to compete with Curse Voice, okay, you don't want Curse Voice to be used by half the people and then the other half to be like, well, I don't use it, so you're getting an unfair advantage. Why does that affect the pro game of League of Legends? Why can't that be something at people who are below silver level, that they get this buff timer but then it disappears at silver and above? Why do we have to balance the game for the worst player in the world so that it ruins the difference between the best player and the second best player?
It also just goes against, they say they don't want bookkeeping, but from a technical perspective, they have retained like 90% of the bookkeeping, which is ult timers, ability timers, summoner timers. Like, most of the timers still exist. Timers aren't a thing that have just gone away all of a sudden. So I don't really, I mean, yeah, you could say, I'm sure Riot would say, well, we got rid of 10%. That's 10% easier for the players. It's like, yeah, but why? You didn't remove the skill. The skill is still something necessary to hone, and it still takes that presence of mind. So why not just either do it, do away with all of it, or include all of it. Like, stop trying to like pretend that the bookkeeping doesn't even exist anymore, or that you're targeting this bookkeeping stuff, because you're clearly not.
Also, here's the thing as well. That's not even a valid excuse that Kerr's voice is forcing you to do this, because I don't know, I hope I'm not breaking any news here, but at every point in history that, as far as I'm aware, League of Legends has existed, stopwatches have also existed, and so you could have pressed the stopwatch, and then once you look back later and you see it gets to the time, you'd know that your buff was ready. So that's the same thing right there.
There are smartphone apps that have like a button for like red buff, blue buff. But you just put your smartphone on your desk and like push a button and it does it for you.
So the point is, everyone could have already used it anyway. So in fact, they already are using it if they know it exists. Therefore, it's not really a big deal. So don't ruin the pro game. I think we've pretty much summed that topic up there, right, Monty?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the end of this episode.
That's right. I'm going to go back to my film noir lifestyle. Just kick back here, have a glass of whiskey, wait for a nice dame to walk in my dark office. Or I'm part of a Bohemian Rhapsody music video. You pick. Which one is it, Thorin?
I'd prefer the first one. Let's just end it there. Right? Let's just end on that note. End.